On those lonely Arizona border roads, the desert doesn't just watch you, it remembers you. Every empty mile has a story someone tried to bury, a voice that never made it home, a pair of headlights that vanished into the dark and never turned around. Tonight on Haunted Fears, you and the Haunted Fears horror family are driving straight into them, one by one, in 11 most disturbing true Arizona's haunted border roads, true midnight stories. So lock your doors, kill the lights, and listen carefully. Something out there has been waiting for you to finally hear its side of the road. And before we take that first turn into the dark, make sure you join the Haunted Fears horror family by subscribing, tapping the bell, and telling the algorithm you're staying for the whole drive. When was the last time a stranger made you feel like they'd known you your whole life, just from the way they said your name? Because that night, on Highway 191, out near the Arizona border, I realized someone who shouldn't exist anymore knew me better than anyone alive ever has. It was just after midnight when I got off my shift. I remember the fluorescent lights of the hospital making everything look already dead. Pale faces, scrub green walls, that faint permanent smell of disinfectant baked into my skin. I was exhausted in the way only a night shift nurse understands. Eyes grainy, mind buzzing but body heavy, like I was moving through warm water. The other nurses joked, the way they always did, about the shortcut home. Take the main route, they said. Stick to where there are actual towns, gas stations, people. But I was too tired. And you make stupid decisions when you convince yourself you're saving 20 minutes. So I took Highway 191. Once you're out there, it feels like the world just peels away. No strip malls, no traffic lights, no billboards. Just a long, black vein of asphalt running through dirt and brush, like it's trying to escape the rest of the state. The temperature had dropped fast after sunset, and I could hear the winter wind tapping and rattling at the car like it wanted in. I turned the heater up and rolled my shoulders, trying to stay awake. My scrubs still smelled like alcohol pads and latex, that sharp, sterile scent that never really leaves. The radio was my only company, and even that was unreliable. One song would come in half clear, then dissolve into static, and a Spanish station from somewhere across the border, then nothing. I kept hitting scan just to give my brain something to latch onto, but it felt like the sound was sliding off the walls of the car instead of filling it. It was just me, the hum of the engine, the occasional sweep of distant truck lights way out on some other road, and that long, long dark ahead. I almost missed him. At first, my brain just registered shape. Something off to the right, beyond the edge of my headlights, where the shoulder dropped into a shallow ditch. My eyes were going in and out of focus, playing tricks. Then the headlights caught him properly, a single figure standing near the white line, one arm raised, a little like he'd thought about waving, and then changed his mind. Dark jacket, jeans, hands bare in the cold, no backpack, no visible car broken down. Just a man, standing where no one should want to stand at that hour. Everything I've ever been told said to keep driving. Don't stop on empty roads for strangers. Call someone if you're worried. But there's another part of me that kicks in. The part that walks into rooms where alarms are screaming and people are bleeding. The part that reaches for the crash cart instead of the exit. That part heard the word cold and alone and no lights around for miles. And my foot went to the brake almost on its own. I pulled onto the shoulder a little ahead of him, my hazard lights blinking weak orange in the dark. In the mirror, I watched him walk toward the passenger side door. I remember thinking he moved like someone who'd been on his feet forever, steady, but dragging a little, like gravity was heavier underneath him than for everyone else. He opened the door and slid in without saying anything at first. The interior light flicked on for just a second, enough for me to see a face that looked tired. Not dirty exactly, just worn, like he'd been outside too long. Short hair, no hat, no glasses. Pale, but everyone looks pale under that kind of light. I killed the dome light and put the car back in drive. "Where you headed?" I asked, defaulting into the same calm, neutral tone I use with patients at 3 in the morning. There was a tiny pause, just long enough for a prickle to crawl up the back of my neck, and then he said, "North is fine. Just not here." His voice was low and almost gentle. Not slurred, not threatening. If anything, it reminded me of the way some of the older doctors spoke to families, like every word had been weighed before being chosen. I nodded, more to myself than to him, and eased back onto the road. The highway swallowed us up again, the hazard lights blinking out, the darkness closing in around the windshield. For a minute or two, we just drove. My hands relaxed a little on the wheel. I told myself I'd done a decent thing, that I'd drop him somewhere with more traffic, a gas station, or at least an exit with a lit sign. I focused on the road, the rhythm of the reflectors sliding under the bumper, the low murmur of the heater. "Long shift?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, letting out half a laugh. "Feels like they're all long lately." "Trauma in the ER," he said, like he was finishing my sentence. "Flu cases in the waiting room. Old man in 12B who won't stop pulling at his oxygen line." I froze. I hadn't told him where I worked. There are a few hospitals within a reasonable distance of that road. He could have guessed. But the room number, the oxygen line, that was too specific. I kept my eyes straight ahead. "Do you work at the hospital?" I asked, aiming for casual and landing closer to brittle. "In a way," he said. "I spend a lot of time there." I swallowed and focused on the center line. The radio had fallen into that weird no-man's land between stations, just a low hiss with occasional broken words. I turned it down. "You look tired," he added. "Just like you did that night in the rain when you had to call your mom from the payphone because your car wouldn't start. Remember? You were shivering so hard you could barely dial." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. "That was a long time ago," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "High school." He made a soft sound, almost amused. "You had that blue jacket then. The one with the broken zipper. You kept trying to pull it up and it would catch halfway, and your fingers went numb. Your mom was mad you'd stayed at the library so late. She always worried when you were out after dark." I could feel my pulse in my throat. There's no way he could know that. Not the broken zipper. Not the library. Not the way my mom's voice had sounded tight and scared over the phone that night. Those are the kinds of memories that live in your own head and no one else's. "You must have a good memory," I said, and my hands were gripping the wheel again, knuckles white. "Maybe you knew me back then." "You were always stubborn," he said, not answering. "Always taking the hard way if it meant you got there a little faster, even if it meant standing in the rain or walking home alone. Like tonight." My gaze flicked up to the rearview mirror before I could stop it. All I saw was the faint outline of his face in the dark back seat, eyes shadowed, features blurred by the low light. I forced my eyes back to the road. "Do we know each other?" I asked. He waited longer this time before replying. "You know me," he said softly. "You just don't want to recognize me yet." Something cold slid through my chest. The heater might as well not have been on. My fingers tingled, that prelude to panic where your body hasn't decided whether to run or freeze. I took a slow breath in through my nose, counted to 4, let it out through my mouth. I've talked people through panic attacks in crowded hallways. I wasn't about to have one alone in my car with a stranger. "Look," I said, keeping my tone as even as I could. "If this is just some weird way of messing with me, it's not funny. I'll drop you off at the next—" "You never did like this road," he said, cutting clean through my words. "Not after what happened. You used to stare out the window whenever your parents drove it, like you were waiting to see something appear in the dark." My throat went dry. "There are a lot of stories about this road," I managed. "A lot of accidents." "Not this one," he said. "Not the way it really happened. Not the way you remember it." I hadn't thought about that night in years. Not really. I'd packed it away in the same box as other things too big to carry around all day. A crash on 1991, a car flipped in the ditch, a relative in the passenger seat who didn't walk away. The official story had been simple enough. Bad weather, bad luck, one more statistic for the highway report. But memory is sticky. It keeps the details you wish it wouldn't. "Stop," I said quietly. "Your dad still blames himself," the man went on, as if he hadn't heard me. "Even though he wasn't the one driving. Even though he couldn't have seen the ice until it was too late. You remember the sound, don't you? The way the world turned sideways?" The steering wheel suddenly felt too big in my hands. The white lines blurred for a second. I blinked hard. "How do you know that?" I asked. My voice came out almost a whisper. He didn't answer right away. I could hear the faint rasp of his breathing in the back seat, steady and unhurried. The radio gave a brief burst of music in Spanish, then fell back into whispering static. "You were sitting in the back," he said at last, "behind her. You saw the whole thing from that angle, the headlights coming at you, the way the guardrail didn't catch the car. You screamed her name until your throat hurt." I didn't realize I'd started shaking my head until I felt my ponytail brush against the headrest. "I told you to stop," I said, louder now. "You need to stop talking about that." "You still have the scar on your wrist from the glass," he continued, as if he were reading off a chart. "You cover it with your watch now. You tell people you slipped on wet tile at work if they ever ask." The scar burned under the band of my watch like it had just been made. For a heartbeat, my vision tunneled. The highway narrowed to a thin gray ribbon in front of me, bordered by complete emptiness. I snapped. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Tell me right now or I'm pulling over and you can walk." He laughed then. Not mean, not mocking, just sad, familiar, in a way that made my stomach drop. "You really don't hear it," he said softly, "even now." "Hear what?" I hissed. "My voice," he said. For a moment, the car might as well have vanished. I was back in a smaller space, softer seats, a different radio playing some old song we both liked, laughter spilling between us as the wipers fought off freezing rain, her hand on the wheel, her voice saying it would be fine, her voice screaming my name when it wasn't. I heard an echo of that voice in his now. "No." I slammed my foot onto the brake so hard the tires squealed. The car jerked, fishtailing a little on the cold pavement before shuddering to a stop on the shoulder. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For a second, all I could taste was adrenaline, metallic at the back of my tongue. I didn't want to look. Everything in me screamed not to open the door, get out, run down the highway if I had to, call someone, anyone. But curiosity is its own kind of compulsion, and I've always been cursed with needing to know. Slowly, like the air itself had gotten thick, I lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror. He was sitting exactly where he had been, back seat, center, hands resting loosely on his knees. The darkness of the car made his features hard to make out, but the shape of his face, the angle of his jaw, the way his mouth turned down just a little when he wasn't smiling. No. The glass of the mirror wavered as my eyes filled. It was impossible. He'd been gone for years. I'd seen the casket. I'd thrown dirt onto it with my own hand. I'd stood on the side of this same stretch of highway and watched yellow tape flutter in the wind, but the longer I stared, the more the resemblance solidified, like a photograph coming into focus. The hitchhiker's features shifted, old lines resurfacing, habits of expression reassembling themselves. It wasn't that his face changed, it was that my denial finally lost its grip. It was him. My brain rejected it. My body didn't. Every muscle locked. My fingers dug into the steering wheel. I couldn't breathe. "You see me now," he said quietly. His voice was exactly the same as the one that used to call me from down the hall, the one that used to tease me about falling asleep with my textbooks open, the one that had yelled my name when metal screamed and glass exploded. I snapped my gaze away from the mirror, staring out the windshield at the dark. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I could feel tears hot on my face, freezing almost instantly in the draft that seeped through the door. "You're dead," I whispered. "You're dead. I watched." "Yes," he said. "You did." The calm in his tone made it worse. If he'd sounded angry, if he'd shouted, I could have pushed it into some corner of my mind labeled nightmare, hallucination, stress. But he sounded like he always had when he was trying to get me to stop spiraling, low, steady, gentle. Except now it was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. "This isn't real," I said. "I'm just tired. I've been working too many nights. You think exhaustion makes up stories you've spent your whole life trying not to tell?" he asked. "You think it invents the exact way your stomach dropped when the car left the road?" "Stop," I said again. My voice broke on the word. "Please, just stop." For a long moment, there was only the hush of the heater fan and the faint hiss of the radio, still turned low, but not completely off. The desert wind pressed against the car, rattling some loose piece of plastic near the rear window. The emptiness outside felt physical, like something leaning in close. "I didn't get to finish my sentence that night," he said finally. "You know that, right?" I was going to say something before. "Don't," I said, almost choking on it. "Don't you dare." Before the truck came around the bend, he went on, ignoring me. Before the headlights flooded the car. Before you heard your own scream like it belonged to someone else. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. The horn let out a short, pathetic honk that sounded ridiculous out there in the middle of nothing. The sound died almost immediately, swallowed by the night. "You're not here," I said. "You can't be here." "In a way, I never left this road," he replied. "You didn't either, not really. You just pretended you did." I don't know how long we sat like that, me staring straight ahead, him just a shape in the mirror behind me. Time felt unhooked from anything sensible. It could have been a minute. It could have been 10. The cold seeped deeper into my bones. "What do you want?" I asked finally, my voice small. He was quiet for so long I thought maybe he'd gone, that my mind had snapped whatever thread was holding him together. Then he said, "You keep driving it." "What?" "This road," he said. "You keep coming back to it, even when you have other options, even when people tell you not to, like you're trying to prove something, or like you owe it something." "I'm just trying to get home," I muttered. "You're trying to rewrite it," he said. "Every time you make it through this stretch alive, part of you thinks you're undoing what happened. That if you drive it enough, one day you'll remember it differently. One day, the car won't flip. One day, I'll walk through the door again." The words hit harder than any impact I'd ever felt, because underneath all my adult logic, all my degrees, and my training, and my rational explanations, there was a tiny traitorous part of me that believed exactly that if I kept facing the road, it would eventually give something back. I didn't answer. I couldn't. "You can't fix it," he said softly. "You can't trade miles for minutes. You can't bargain with asphalt." "I know," I whispered. "Do you?" A new sound drifted in around us then, low at first, like distant thunder. Gradually it grew louder, a rolling growl that my brain finally matched to an oncoming engine. Headlights appeared in the rear view, far back but gaining twin white points that bobbed with the imperfections of the road. I told myself it was just another truck, another insomniac hauling something north while the rest of the state slept. I told myself this was normal. Trucks used this route. I breathed in, out, trying to anchor myself. The approaching lights washed over the inside of the car as they drew closer, throwing long shadows across the dash, glinting off the mirror. For a second, they flared so bright I could see every detail of his face in the reflection. It was exactly him. Same eyes, same faint scar near the eyebrow, same way his mouth tilted when he was trying not to smile. I jerked my gaze away, heart punching at my ribs. The truck roared past on the left, wind buffeting the car so hard it rocked on its shocks. For an instant, the cab was filled with noise and white light and the blur of metal rushing by. And then it was gone. Silence dropped back over everything like a blanket. The heater hummed. The radio whispered. My own breathing sounded too loud in the cramped space. "I need you to get out," I said hoarsely. "Now." He didn't respond. My fingers shook as I reached for the lock, thumb pressing down, listening for the soft mechanical click. I turned my head, refusing to look in the mirror, and stared over my shoulder into the back seat. It was empty. No indentation on the cushion, no scuff on the floor mat. The faint, cold patch in the air might have been my imagination. The only proof he'd ever been there at all was the way my chest ached and the taste of salt on my lips where the tears had slid down. "Okay," I whispered to no one. I faced forward again and put the car back in drive. For a few seconds, I just sat there, listening to the engine idle, forcing my hands to unclench enough to grip the wheel properly. Then I pulled back onto the highway. The rest of the drive home felt like moving through a photograph. The road, the reflectors, the occasional oncoming vehicle, they all seemed too thin, too flat, like a backdrop. I kept glancing at the rear view despite myself. It showed only my own pale face, eyes wide and raw, framed by the dark. When I finally reached town, the first streetlight felt almost obscene, too bright, too normal. I parked in my usual spot, walked up to my door, and stood there for a long moment with my keys in my hand, listening to the familiar hum of a sleeping neighborhood. No voices, no footsteps, no one calling my name. Inside, I went straight to the bathroom and rolled up my sleeve. The scar on my wrist caught the light. Thin, pale, crescent-shaped, right where I remembered. I pressed my thumb against it until it hurt. You can tell yourself a lot of things in the daylight. You can blame a hallucination on exhaustion, on stress, on trauma digging its way back up. You can catalog every symptom, diagnose yourself, file it away. But out there on Highway 191, alone in the dark, with the smell of disinfectant still clinging to you and the wind rattling at the doors, none of that helps when a stranger sits down in your back seat and tells you things he should never know. It doesn't help when you look in the mirror and see a face you buried years ago. I still take the long way to work now. Extra lights, extra traffic, extra minutes of bad radio, and red lights and bored commuters. I tell my coworkers I'm just sick of the desert, that I finally got tired of the nothingness out there. I don't tell them that sometimes, when I'm driving home and the road is quiet and the night is deep, I swear I can feel the weight of someone sitting just behind me, like the imprint of a memory on the fabric of the seat. I don't tell them that every time I glance in the mirror, I half expect to see him there, patiently waiting, ready to finish the sentence he never got to say. And I definitely don't tell them that once in a while, as I pass the turnoff that leads back to 191, I hear his voice, clear as if he's right next to my ear, saying my name the way only someone who's known you your whole life can say it. Imagine driving into a stretch of road where your engine is roaring, your boots hit gravel, your radio is hissing, but your ears tell you absolutely nothing is there. That's the night I, Isaiah, found out there's a lane outside Nogales where sound doesn't just die. It refuses to exist. It was one of my first solo late shifts, the kind where the older agents slap you on the shoulder and say, "You'll be fine out there," in a way that makes it clear they're waiting to see if you'll screw something up. The sky over Nogales was clear, winter cold, the kind of night where the stars feel close and sharp, and the air bites through your uniform if you stand still too long. I remember thinking it was almost peaceful as I rolled along the paved road, the border fence a darker line in the distance, the orange wash of floodlights painting the horizon. I had the radio on low, more out of habit than anything, snatches of English, Spanish, dispatch chatter, the occasional bad joke from someone trying to stay awake. My truck hummed beneath me, steady and familiar. I was still new enough that the weight of the badge on my chest felt strange, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The thermal alert came in just after 1 in the morning. A little ping on my in-dash display followed by dispatch calling my unit, asking me to check a flicker near a less traveled stretch by the fence. The cursor on my GPS blinked over a spot where the mapped patrol road ran close to the barrier. Probably nothing, they said. Just confirm and clear. That's how these things usually go. A warm boulder, a stray dog, heat still bleeding out of the ground from the day. You drive, you check, you call it in, you move on. I turned off the main road onto the dirt service track, feeling the tires leave the smooth asphalt and drop into the shallow ruts. Dust puffed up in my headlights and hung there like it didn't know where else to go. From here, the fence looked taller, more solid. Just metal and welds and shadows. But at night, it feels like the edge of something much bigger than two countries. The closer you get, the more you hear that low metallic hum from the wind running along it. I'd learned to stop really hearing it on training rides, the way you forget the constant air conditioner in an old building. I eased the truck along, following the gray line on the GPS. About a quarter mile in, I saw a narrower lane branching off, even closer to the fence, just two hard-packed tire paths and some scattered rocks. In my windshield, it looked well used. The dirt pressed down flat, faint recent tread marks overlapping older ones. On the GPS, it didn't exist. The screen showed my cursor in open desert, the main patrol road continuing straight somewhere to my left. The thermal marker, though, lined up more with that narrow lane. I slowed, frowned at the discrepancy, then told myself it was just a map that hadn't been updated. Out here, things get graded, rerouted, carved in by tires before someone at a desk redraws a line. I turned the wheel and eased the truck down onto the unmarked track, dust puffing around the tires. The sound changed first. At least, that's what I thought. The engine seemed to grow louder for a moment, the rattle of gear in the back of the cab sharper. Gravel pinged against the undercarriage. My radio hissed and crackled, fighting to hold on to a signal. Then I went maybe 3 truck lengths farther, and everything stopped. It was like someone had cut the cable on the whole world's audio. No fade out, no gradual quiet. 1 second I was in a noisy, vibrating machine. The next it might as well have been a photograph. My hands felt the wheel humming under them, but my ears got nothing. My own breathing, which had sounded ragged in my head a moment before, vanished. I could see my chest move. I couldn't hear it. I tapped the brake on reflex and watched the hood dip. The truck responded. The speedometer needle slid down, still no sound. For a few seconds, I honestly wondered if something had happened to me, some medical event that had just switched off my hearing. Training whispered, "Check yourself, assess, don't freak." I spoke out loud, just my own name at first. Isaiah. I felt my throat move, the tiny air shift in my mouth. My ears registered absolutely nothing. The weirdest part was the windshield view didn't change at all. The fence still ran alongside me in the headlights, every post and slat and weld point clear. Dust still hung in the beams. Farther off, the orange glow from border lights painted faint halos in the distance. It looked exactly like any other night, but it felt like someone had wrapped invisible padding around my entire head. My fingers were starting to shake around the wheel. I exhaled slowly, saw my breath fog just a little in the cab, and forced my hand off the wheel long enough to hit the horn. The truck gave that tiny physical twitch it always does when the horn engages. No sound. Not a single chirp. I do not scare easily. I can walk up on a group in the dark, heart pounding, hands steady, head clear. This was different. This was my own body going out of sync with the world around it. And every instinct I had was screaming that something fundamental had just gone wrong. The smart move was to shift into reverse and just back out until the noise came back. There was another part of me, though, the part that got me to sign up for this job, that refused to bail without finishing what I'd been sent to do. I still had that thermal blip blinking on the handheld. I put the truck in park, grabbed the unit and my flashlight, and opened the door. Again, action without audio. The latch released, the hinges swung. My boots hit the step. I felt every one of those things through my hands, arms, and legs. I heard none of them. Even the slam of the door, which should have echoed out there in the emptiness, might as well have been silent on a movie screen. The cold hit me right away, a dry winter chill that soaked through the fabric. I watched my breath plume out in a brief white cloud. It was usually something I'd hear in the quiet. My own breathing, the faint rasp as air moved. Now it was just a visual effect. I walked around the front of the truck, trailing my gloved fingertips along the hood, grounding myself in the physical vibrations beneath the metal. The engine was still running, steady and strong. It simply wasn't reaching my ears. The fence sat maybe 20-30 feet away, running parallel to the lane. Beyond it, black brush and rock. The handheld screen showed the heat source a little ahead and to my right, close to the fence line. A small shape, pulsing just enough to stay noticeable. I started toward it. It felt like walking through a dream where everything had weight but no sound. My boots began to sink ever so slightly into softer dust as I stepped off the truck's packed tracks. I watched little puffs kick up around my soles, the dry soil collapsing in on itself. There should have been crunches, scrapes, subtle movements. I got none of it. Closer to the fence, I saw them, prints in the dirt. They weren't obvious at first, but once I caught the pattern, they were unmistakable. A line of footprints heading in from the direction of the patrol road, skirting the lane I'd just driven, angling toward the fence. Decent size. Human. No distinct tread I could identify at a glance, just the worn, smooth texture of somebody's well-used boots. I knelt, touched a fingertip to the edge of one print. The ground there was loose and fresh, easily disturbed. Whatever had made them hadn't been gone long. The handheld vibrated a little, the thermal hit intensifying at the edge of the screen. I glanced up. The prints continued another 10, maybe 15 paces ahead. I followed, counting each step in my head because I couldn't count them with my ears. 1, 2, 3. Halfway down the line, a second set of footprints joined the first. Lighter, a slightly narrower shape, as if someone else had fallen into step. They overlapped here and there, the pattern of two people walking side by side for a short distance. I swallowed. The inside of my mouth was going dry. I kept going. The last print stopped a few feet short of the fence. It didn't fade. It didn't get messy. One final clear heel and toe pressed into the dust. And then nothing. Bare, unmarked ground between that and the barrier. No scuff where someone might have leaped. No drag where they'd been pulled. Just empty stretch. Every hair on my arms lifted. The air felt thinner somehow, like it had been sucked out of the little space around me. I looked up and down the fence, squinting for cut wire, bent metal, any sign of tampering. It looked like any other section. Ugly, industrial, intact. I turned slowly in a circle, the world unnervingly still around me. My truck's headlights glared in the distance, twin cones pointed down the lane. The engine shook the frame. I just couldn't hear it. That's when the screaming started. The first second, I thought I was feeling my own blood pounding against my skull, a tightness in my jaw, a pressure in my sinuses. Then it sharpened into something else, a high, thin sound from very far away, except it wasn't traveling through the air. It was punching straight through the inside of my head. I froze. It didn't have a clear direction. It wasn't left or right or ahead. It was just out there, and also somehow inside me. It rose in pitch, then dropped, then rose again, like someone yelling wordless noise from miles off into a canyon, the echoes folding back on themselves. My first reflex was to clap my hands over my ears. I did it even though a part of me knew it was pointless. My gloved palms pressed against the sides of my head, sealing my ears. The screaming did not dampen one bit. It didn't even change tone. I squeezed my eyes shut. The dust smell was suddenly overwhelming, dry and old and baked in. I focused on my breathing. In, out, in, out. I could see my chest move. I could not hear the air. The handheld buzzed again in my hand, a rapid vibration this time. I risked cracking one eye open and looked down. The thermal image was a bright, unstable blob now, swelling and contracting in place, as if something kept appearing and disappearing over the same patch of ground. The screaming shifted. It didn't get closer or quieter. It warped. For a second, it almost sounded like voices. Not clear words, but syllables on top of each other, layers of different pitches trying to occupy the same space. I felt my legs wanting to move, either toward it or away from it. I honestly couldn't tell you. Everything instinctual in me was confused. Flight and fight both hit at once and jammed. I forced my feet backward. One step. The screaming pulsed, like it had noticed. It didn't change volume. It just adjusted the same way your eyes adjust when light flickers but doesn't fully go out. I took another backward step. The endless quiet around me made my own fear feel louder than ever, even if I couldn't actually hear it. I measured my pace, tried not to turn around too fast, kept the fence in my periphery like something might push through it if I dared to fully look away. By the time my boots found the more solid, packed part of the lane again, my jaw hurt from clenching. The screaming kept going at that same impossible distance, constant and distant, and yet completely inside. I reached the truck, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door open. Climbing back into the cab felt like crawling into a lifeboat. I shut the door hard, more out of habit than expectation. The thunk of metal on metal was another silent mime. My hands shook on the gear shift. I put the truck in reverse and eased my foot onto the accelerator, eyes glued to the mirrors, watching the narrow lane slide away. The fence retreated by inches, half a truck length, and nothing changed. Another half. Still that dead, padded world. Then, without fanfare, everything slammed back. The roar of the engine hit me like a physical blow. The gravel crunching under the tires sounded like rocks in a blender. The radio, which I'd left at a low background murmur, blasted pure static loud enough to make me flinch. Every tiny rattle in the cabin, every key on my belt, every squeak of the seat felt exaggerated. I stomped the brake. The truck shuddered to a stop. The screaming in my head cut off mid-sound, leaving an absence that rang even louder. I sat there, chest heaving, ears actually aching from the flood of normal noise. For a moment, I just held the steering wheel and let my body shake. I turned the radio down to nothing, needing the real outside sounds more than any background chatter. The fence hummed out there, like it always did. The wind brushed against the truck. Far off, I could just make out another unit calling in somewhere else on the line. My thumb found the transmit button on the mic. "Unit checking," I said, and hearing my own voice come out small and ragged was almost a relief. "Thermal anomaly appears negative. No sign of movement along the fence, returning to main route." Dispatch came back a second later, tone casual. "Copy. Your track shows you've been on the main service road the whole time. Continue patrol," I frowned. "Say again on track." "You're good," the voice repeated. "No deviation from assigned route. Continue." I glanced at the GPS. The little line of my path, what should have been my turn onto the narrow lane and back, was just a smooth curve along the original dirt road. According to the mapping, I'd never left it. There was no record of that branch. No indication I'd been anywhere but where I was supposed to be. If I'd gone another 100 yards forward, it would have been almost possible to convince myself I'd imagined the lane entirely. Almost. I didn't say anything else about it on the radio. I just acknowledged and moved on, steering the truck back toward the paved road, glancing once in the side mirror at the stretch I'd just left. The lane was still there, ruts curving away into the dark, hugging the fence closer than the path beneath my tires. It looked ordinary, boring even. A strip of dirt and scattered rock. My ears rang all the way back to the station. Later, in the locker room, I checked the digital logs, my GPS track, my times, my notes. Everything on paper and screen said I'd had a routine sweep, slight slowdown at the point of the thermal hit, then right back up to patrol speed. No unusual routes, no anomalies. There was no mention of the moment where the world stopped making noise. I didn't bring it up with anyone. You learn fast in this job that some stories you keep to yourself if you want people to trust you in real emergencies. But I watched the older guys more closely after that. The way a couple of them got quiet when certain parts of the fence came up. The way one of them, offhand, told a trainee, "If your GPS doesn't show it, you stay off it," with a seriousness that didn't fully match his casual tone. Since that night, whenever my assignment puts me anywhere near that stretch by Nogales, I stay on the marked path. If my display says there's only one road, I believe it now, no matter what my headlights show. Sometimes, though, when the wind dies and the night settles in heavy, there's a moment out there where the hum of the fence and the noise of the truck and the static of the radio line up just wrong. Everything seems to dip, like a sound wave, canceling itself out for a split second. It only lasts a heartbeat. But in that tiny pocket of almost silence, I swear I feel that same pressure behind my ears, that same distant, impossible screaming that's not really in the air at all. And every time, I tighten my grip on the wheel, keep my eyes on the mapped line, and remind myself that some roads, even if you can see them, are better left unheard. How long would you follow homemade detour signs in a storm if every turn made time feel less and less real? I'm Byron, and the night I learned the answer to that was the night SR 286 tried to keep me longer than I was supposed to stay alive. I run deliveries through southern Arizona. Nothing glamorous. Paper products, cleaning supplies, bulk snacks, whatever needs to go from the city to those tiny towns and gas stations that feel like they're hanging on by their fingernails. That evening I was late. A store out toward Lukeville had begged for a rush run before the weekend, and I'd said yes, because overtime is overtime, and the route chart said I could make it there and back with daylight to spare. The desert had other plans. By the time I was halfway down State Route 286, the sky to the west had turned into one solid wall of dark. You can see monsoon storms building from a long way off. It's like watching something huge rolling toward you in slow motion. The sun vanished behind that wall, and the light went from golden to gray to that weird flat color you only get before a serious storm. The first drops hit my windshield as I passed a lonely cattle guard, big splats that smeared under the wipers. Then the clouds opened. Within a minute, I was driving in a curtain of water so thick the high beams just lit up white. The road, which had been a decent, lonely ribbon of asphalt, started to look more like a river. I slowed down. My phone had no service out there. Not unusual. But the little bar icon disappearing still made me feel more alone. The radio was playing some classic rock station out of Tucson, half static already. The wipers thudded back and forth, hypnotic, fighting to keep a view of anything beyond 10 yards. I remember thinking, you can turn back. You can be the guy who calls and says, "Sorry, the weather was too bad." But pride is a stupid thing. I kept going. Maybe 10 minutes into the downpour, I saw the first sign. It was homemade, not the bright diamond orange you expect from road crews. Just a sheet of plywood on a stake, letters slashed on with black spray paint. Detour. An arrow pointed right, off the main highway, toward a dirt access road that vanished into the wash of rain. I almost missed it. The reflection of my headlights on the wet surface pulled my attention just in time. I eased off the gas and squinted through the water, looking for any sign of official cones or trucks. Nothing. Just that one board, shining wet. I gripped the wheel and argued with myself. The map in my head said there weren't any closures scheduled tonight. The rational part of my brain said, that's not DOT signage, but I also knew these storms can turn any low spot on SR 286 into a death trap in minutes. Maybe some rancher or trooper had slapped up a warning where the road dips, a quick fix until a crew could come out. Another lightning flash lit up the horizon, slicing the sky open and turning every saguaro into a black skeleton. The thunder hit almost at the same time, deep enough that I felt it in my chest. I turned right. The truck lurched onto the dirt. Instantly, the tires started to fight for grip in the mud. The ruts were already there, deep and slick, like other vehicles had taken this same lane not long before me. I told myself that meant it was safe. The wipers worked overtime, clacking, smearing the water in brief windows I could see through. I looked down at the dashboard clock, 7:42 p.m. The dirt road twisted between saguaros and low scrub. The rain turned everything into a moving blur outside the beams. I slowed more, just trying not to spin out or slide into a ditch I couldn't see. The radio started to fade, the song dissolving into a thin, ghostly hum. After a few minutes, another sign appeared in the lights. Same style, plywood, spray paint, dripping water. Detour with an arrow, this time pointing left, deeper into the dark. Okay, I muttered, more to hear my own voice than anything. Just a loop around whatever's flooded. I turned left. The truck rolled and swayed in the ruts. Mud splashed up over the wheel wells. Lightning kept showing me brief, high-contrast snapshots. Jagged mountains bent under low clouds. A fence line disappearing into the black, one sagging power pole leaning over nothing. I glanced down at the clock again. 7:42 p.m. I frowned. I hadn't been counting exactly, but I knew we'd been on the dirt longer than a minute. The seconds were ticking, but the minutes weren't. 7:42, 7:42, 7:42. Stupid old dash, I said out loud, trying to laugh it off. The truck wasn't new. The display flickered sometimes when it was hot. Maybe the storm had messed with something. The radio hissed, then picked up something else. A jingle, bright and corny. The kind of thing you'd expect from an AM station decades ago. A woman's voice sang a brand name I didn't recognize, tinny and cheerful, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I spun the dial looking for the Tucson station again. The numbers rolled by, but all I got were more fragments. Saxophone notes from some old big band, an announcer's voice clipped and far away, then a product ad for cigarettes with a jarringly upbeat chorus. Half the brands went over my head. I checked the clock again. 7:42 p.m. A bolt of lightning hit close enough ahead that the flash left spots dancing in my vision. The blast of thunder came almost on top of it, rattling the truck. For a split second, all the saguaros in front of me leapt into stark relief, arms up like they were reaching for something they couldn't grasp. Right between them, my headlights hit the first abandoned car. It sat half off the rutted dirt, nose down in a shallow wash, rain running in torrents around the tires. The shape was old, boxy, long hood, chrome bumpers dulled by time. It looked like something from a photograph of Arizona in the 70s. Faded green paint, squared-off lines. My foot moved to the brake without thinking. The truck slowed, and my beams washed over the side of the car. The windows were fogged and streaked with water. Through the grime, I could just make out the glow of a radio dial. Old-fashioned, with a needle that slid along numbers instead of a digital readout. The little orange light behind it was on. Inside, thin music played. Strings, a crooner's voice, the scratch and hiss of an old recording. Not loud, but there. Clear enough that for a second it cut through the pounding of rain on my own windshield. Then my wipers swept, and in that exact motion, the sound vanished. The car was still there, metal, wet, and dull. The radio dial light was still glowing. I couldn't hear the music anymore. An instinct I can't explain told me not to stop. Every story you hear about people who get stuck in washes during monsoon flashed through my mind. I eased up on the brake and kept rolling, steering carefully around the stranded car. As I passed it, I tried to see inside. Shapes in the front seats. Could have been trash bags, blankets, or people hunched low. I told myself if I saw someone move, I'd stop. I didn't see anyone move. The detour road twisted again. Another sign appeared, spray-painted arrow sending me right this time. I followed. The truck slid, caught, kept going. I looked at the clock. 7:42 p.m. A chill slid down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. I reached up and tapped the glass of the display like that would help. The colon between the numbers blinked, steady. Seconds were flowing. Minutes were not. The radio crackled. A child laughed, quick and bright. then cut off like someone had hit a switch. An announcer started listing store hours for a place I'd never heard of, voice crisp, old-fashioned. The static ate him a second later. Thunder rolled overhead, a drawn-out growl. 100 yards ahead, another vehicle materialized in the beam. This one was a pickup, older than mine by decades. A faded red with a white stripe, the kind you still see sitting behind barns. It was angled off the road, one back tire half sunk into a muddy rut, the bed filled with indistinct shapes under a tarp. Its brake lights glowed weakly, murky through the rain. The engine wasn't running. I couldn't see any exhaust. But as I crept closer, my own radio picked up something again, a baseball game. The announcer's excited voice rattled out statistics for players I'd never heard of, teams that had changed names years before I was born. I rolled by, wipers thudding, eyes locked on the road. In the edge of my vision, I saw a dark shape in the driver's seat, head turned away, a hand on the wheel, completely still. My chest felt tight. I forced myself to breathe. "You're just catching old stations," I said under my breath. "Storms bouncing signals, old trucks, junked cars. People leave weird stuff out here. That's all." Lightning forked again, showing me another sagging power line, another cactus bent by years of wind. The rain hammered down. The ruts ahead deepened, turned from puddles to small rivers. I fought to keep the truck from drifting. I checked the clock. 7:42 p.m. I don't know why that number stuck like that. Started to feel like a threat, but it did. Every time my eyes dropped, every time it failed to advance, it was like the world was whispering, "You don't get to move forward either." That's when I heard the voice. It was small, high, right on the edge of what you'd think was the wind whistling through a crack. At first I thought I'd imagined it, the way you imagine your phone vibrated when it didn't. "Hey." Just that. Faint. Off to the right, beyond the beam of the headlights. I swallowed and tightened my grip. The next flash of lightning showed a drainage dip ahead, water rushing across the dirt in a muddy sheet. I eased off the gas, calculated the depth with my eyes the way you learn to out here. It looked shallow enough for the truck. Too much hesitation could get me stuck worse. I rolled forward, tires cutting through the water. The sound of it under the floor, sloshing and hissing, blended with the rain, with the clack of the wipers. For just a heartbeat, everything was white, and noise, and motion. "Can I get a ride?" The voice was clearer this time. A child. Young. From the passenger side, just beyond the reach of the lights. It had that uneven volume, like it was fighting through glass or distance. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I didn't look. I told myself not to look. I stared straight down the center of the road, into the charging stream of rain, scanning for the next sign, the next rut, the next place I could lose control. "You're not really hearing that," I muttered. Storm. Radio. Nerves. The radio chose that moment to lurch into a commercial for a soda brand that, as far as I knew, didn't exist anymore. Kids laughing. A jingle so peppy it made my teeth hurt. It sounded like something from a grainy TV ad you'd see in a nostalgia video. My skin crawled. Another sign loomed out of the dark, nailed to a crooked post. Detour. Arrow left. The board had been out here long enough that the edges were fraying, layers of old paint visible beneath the black letters, like it had been repurposed more than once. I turned left. The road narrowed. Saguaros crowded closer. The headlights tunneled into a thinner slice of world, with everything else swallowed by black. "Can I get a ride?" the child's voice repeated. Still off to the side. Still never quite inside the light. I broke my rule and glanced over. Just for a second. Just at the window. Nothing but night. Rain on glass. In the dim reflection, my own face looked older, more washed out than it should have. I faced forward again. "Where are you going?" the voice asked. It sounded like it came from everywhere and nowhere. From the ditch, from the bed of my truck, from the space 3 feet in front of the grill. The words were simple, but something in the tone made my stomach twist. Not pleading, not scared, just curious, patient. "I'm working," I said before I could stop myself. It felt stupid the second it left my mouth, talking to empty air. The radio crackled. A weather bulletin came through, thin and warbly, warning of a severe storm cell moving across Pima County, advising drivers to stay off rural roads, to avoid low-lying areas, to wait out the worst of it. I glanced at the clock. 7:42 p.m. Adrenaline surged so hard my hands tingled. Outside, lightning lit up another car. This one off farther to the left, just enough for its silhouette to register. A big old station wagon, long and low, nose aimed into a shallow wash. Its headlights were off. Its interior glowed faintly. I could hear, for just a heartbeat, the muffled strain of some crooner belting a love song through a single dashboard speaker. Then the wipers swiped, and I was back to the hiss of my own truck, the pounding rain. "How long you gonna follow him?" the child's voice asked. "Follow who?" I said. "The signs." I hadn't told anyone about the first ones. There was no one else in the cab. I hadn't even said the word out loud yet. I swallowed hard. "How long have I been driving?" I asked, mostly to myself. The truck's odometer told me I'd done a few more miles since I'd left the pavement. My sense of time told me we had been on dirt for at least half an hour, maybe more. The sky was still a uniform slab of black. The storm showed no signs of moving on. I looked at the clock. 7:42 p.m. My vision swam for a second. The light from the display seemed too bright. The colon blinked. On, off, each pulse matching the thud of my heart in a way that made me nauseous. Lightning split the sky again. In that frozen instant of bright, the road ahead looked wrong. The ruts crossed each other in ways that didn't make sense, loops and curves that suggested more than one path, all collapsing back into the same narrow track. "You're not supposed to be here," the voice said. For the first time, the words carried something like emotion. Not anger, not malice, just a simple, matter-of-fact statement, like a kid telling you that you've walked into the wrong classroom. My throat felt dry. "Where is here?" I asked. I didn't expect an answer. I got one anyway. "Nowhere yet." The radio exploded with sound, music, ads, announcers, all at once, stacked on top of each other. It was like spinning the dial as fast as possible and landing on every station for a fraction of a second. Only somehow they all kept playing together. A polka beat under a news bulletin, a jingle bleeding into a preacher promising salvation, a game show host shouting over a laugh track. I slammed the power knob off. The truck's cabin fell back into just the storm and the engine. Even those sounded weird now. Distant. Muffled, like someone else's truck in someone else's rain. Ahead, another sign loomed up, the letters warped slightly by the angle of my headlights. Detour. No arrow this time, just the word, hanging there in the storm. I eased to a stop. Mud sucked at the tires. The wipers squeaked, then thunked back and forth. The rain washed everything outside into moving streaks of gray. "Can I get a ride?" the child's voice asked again, softer now. It sounded like it was right behind my seat. I didn't turn around. Every horror story, every instinct, every self-preserving cell in my body screamed, "Don't." I stared at the sign instead, at the way the paint had run into the grain of the wood, at the nail heads rusting along the edges. "How do I get back to the highway?" I asked. For a long moment, there was only the storm. Then very quietly, like someone whispering across a long room, "Stop following them." My shoulders sagged. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The dashboard clock still said 7:42 p.m. I put the truck in reverse. Every sensible thing I'd ever been told about driving on wet dirt said this was a bad idea. But I didn't see any choice that didn't feel worse. I eased my foot onto the gas, feeling the tires spin, catch, spin again, then slowly start to roll me backward along the ruts I'd carved on the way in. As soon as I started moving in reverse, something shifted. The storm didn't let up, but the sound of it changed. The rain on the windshield became less like static and more like a pattern I recognized, the kind of relentless drumming you get used to in a good downpour. The engine noise got clearer. The wheel's vibration synced back up with my inner sense of motion. I watched the homemade sign slide out of my high beams. Muddy water flowed around the tires. Saguaros passed in the periphery of the lights, tall and silent. I checked the clock. 7:43 p.m. The minute had ticked over. Relief hit so fast it made me dizzy. I kept backing up slowly, carefully, not daring to look anywhere but the lane behind me. "Don't stop," the child's voice said. It came from ahead of me now, somewhere beyond the windshield, as if the speaker were standing in the road I was leaving. Tiny, fainter with every yard. I didn't answer. I just kept going. After what felt like much longer than it probably was, I saw a dim, familiar reflection. My own tire tracks crossing, then joining a slightly wider set I recognized from earlier. The dirt smoothed into something more compacted. In another few yards, the truck's rear tires bumped up onto the firmer shoulder of SR 286. The rain was still coming down hard, but the highway's painted center line shone in the beams like a lifeline. I put the truck in drive and pulled forward, back onto the actual road. The moment the tires hit asphalt, the radio, still off, popped faintly, like something discharging, then went quiet again. I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was no sign of the narrow dirt lane, no torn-up entrance, no plywood sign, just the dark outline of desert on either side of the highway, and the rain, and the endless line of wet pavement stretching behind me. I looked at the clock. 9:06 p.m. 2 hours. 2 hours had passed between 7:42 and now, according to the truck. The fuel gauge agreed. My body agreed. That particular heaviness in my shoulders, the ache in my knees, you get after too long in the seat. I drove the rest of the way in a daze. The store had long since closed by the time I rolled into their lot, the windows dark. I parked under a light, hands still gripping the wheel too tightly. My phone pinged as it found signal again. Missed calls, messages asking where I was, if I'd turned back. I didn't tell them about the detour. When I headed home much later that night, the storm had broken. The sky was a clean bruised blue-black. The desert smelled like wet dust and creosote, sharp and oddly clean. I passed the spot where I thought I'd seen the first sign, just smooth highway shoulder, no obvious tire churn, no leaning post. I drive SR 286 less these days. When I have to take it, I keep a close eye on the shoulders, especially when the weather turns mean. Any scrap of wood, any shape that looks like a sign in my headlights, and my throat goes dry. Once, months later, a monsoon rolled in while I was halfway down that same stretch. The rain hit hard. The wipers fell into that same heavy rhythm. For a second, my clock blinked, and I saw 7:42 p.m. again, clear as day, before it jumped to the real time. Out in the dark, just beyond the edge of my beams, the wind shifted. "Can I get a ride?" a small voice asked. I didn't answer. I didn't look. I just stayed on the painted line, knuckles white, eyes forward, ignoring every homemade sign the night tried to show me. Have you ever noticed a road sign creeping closer to your house, as if it's trying to follow you home? My name is Joe, and the night mile marker 23 reached my driveway was the night I stopped believing in bad stretches of road and started wondering if some places out here decide who belongs and who doesn't. I started using that back road after the divorce. The highway into Douglas is fine during the day, but at night it feels like everyone is watching you. The gas stations, the lit-up fast food joints, the same couple of patrol cars that know every regular's vehicle. I didn't want to drive past any of that right before or after handing off my kid, so I found the county road, older pavement, no lights, hardly any traffic. Just me, the dark, and the occasional 18-wheeler blasting past without even dipping their high beams. The first time I saw mile marker 23, it meant nothing. Just another bent, faded sign on the shoulder. The reflective numbers were mostly scraped off, only the 2 and the 3 still catching my headlights at the right angle. I noticed it because it was right at the point where the road seemed to get a little emptier, like even the desert thinned out there. You drive the same stretch enough times, you start making mental bookmarks. Here's where the cell signal dies. Here's where the radio station changes. Here's where you always see one particular ranch's security light. For me, 23 was the spot where my chest started to tighten. Most Friday nights looked the same for a while. I'd leave my place on the edge of town, take the main road out just far enough to hit the turnoff, then slide onto the county asphalt. It was a little rougher, patched in places, but it cut 10 minutes off the trip to the meeting point. We traded off in the parking lot of an all-night diner off the highway, neutral ground. I'd try not to look at my ex's new guy when he was there, and he pretended not to size me up. Then I'd take the same back road home, alone. On those returns, it was always dark. No street lights, just the narrow cone of my headlights and the weak glow of the dash. The desert smelled like dust and old heat. Even at night, you can feel it coming off the ground. Ranch dogs barked in the distance sometimes, their voices carrying weirdly far in the open air. Every once in a while, a semi would tear past, buffeting my little car with a blast of wind that felt personal. I saw mile marker 23 every time. Not because I wanted to, it just became part of the routine, the way you start counting certain cracks in your bedroom ceiling when you can't sleep. Same place, same angle, just after a shallow curve where the road dipped a little. I'd catch the ghost of the numbers flashing back at me. 2, 3, a little green metal, then gone. The first night I thought something was off. I wrote it off as stress. I'd had a rough handoff. My ex was late, our kid was cranky, and her boyfriend had decided that was a good night to give me advice about stability. I drove home, tight-jawed and quiet, gripping the wheel too hard. The radio was on some talk station I wasn't really hearing. The county road stretched out in front of me like a tunnel. When the 23 sign flashed in my lights, it looked closer to town than it should have, just by a little. Mile markers are set distances. You're not supposed to feel like they've moved, but something in my gut tugged. I remember actually saying, "Huh," out loud. I got home, parked in the same gravel strip I always had, and told myself I was imagining things. Human brains are bad at distance in the dark. The road all looks the same after a while. That's all it was. Except the next Friday, it felt closer again. Not by a lot. 10, maybe 20 car lengths. The kind of shift you'd never notice if you weren't already watching for it. The sign still looked beat up. Its post slightly leaning. The weeds at its base the same dry, waist-high brush that lines every Arizona shoulder. But the way it appeared in my headlights, just past that ranch gate, not before it, was wrong. I slowed a little as I passed, scanning the side of the road. Maybe they'd done some work. Maybe they'd straightened the asphalt and replaced the posts. Maybe I was misremembering. Behind the sign, the ditch dropped down into a run of rocks and scrub. The darkness in there looked thicker than the darkness above it, if that makes any sense. Like it had weight. As my car rolled by, a little gust of wind blew through the weeds. They rattled against the metal post. For a heartbeat, it sounded like whispering. I turned the radio up. After that, it became a problem. I didn't tell anyone because how do you admit you're keeping track of where a stupid sign feels like it is? But every trip, it crept a little closer. A few yards at a time, always in the direction of town, never the other way. Sometimes it would surprise me, popping into the beam earlier than I expected. Other times, it seemed like it had leapt forward, ending up right by some landmark I swore it hadn't been near before. I tried to prove myself wrong. One Sunday afternoon, when my kid was with me and napping on the couch, I drove the county road in daylight. No storm, no dark, just bright sun bleaching the asphalt. I counted the official mile markers from the highway back toward town. 25, 24, 23, 22. They were all there, at apparently normal intervals, standing in their chipped, neglected glory. Nobody had dragged them. Still, when night came, 23 didn't feel right. The worst part wasn't the sign itself. It was the feeling that came with passing it. At first, it was just nerves. That slight prickle you get when you know the road dips, and you're half expecting a deer or a cow to lunge out of the shadows. Then it turned into something heavier, a cold weight between my shoulder blades. The sense that someone, or something, was down in the ditch just below the beam of my headlights, watching the roof of my car go by. One night, I saw something that made me almost turn around and take the long way. I was driving back from the diner later than usual. The exchange had gotten delayed. My ex's car had broken down. There had been calls, shuffling, another pickup location. By the time I hit the county road home, it was past midnight. The air through the cracked window felt even colder than it should have for a desert night. The stars were out but weak, washed by some thin layer of high haze. I was too tired to turn on any music. As I came up on where I thought 23 should be, I realized I'd passed the last thing I usually mentally tagged as "before the sign" a while ago. I frowned, scanning the shoulder. The marker wasn't there. I drove another minute, maybe two. Still nothing. The road dipped through a shallow low spot. My headlights hit a piece of metal on the right, the remains of an old guardrail, twisted and half buried. Beyond it, the ditch looked deeper than usual, almost like a cut someone had carved deliberately. The sign stood right at the edge of that drop. It was closer to town than I knew it should be. I was sure of it. I could feel my own internal map protesting. The numbers on the post were more worn than I remembered, the reflective paint, patchy and dull. As I passed, the 23 flared back at me for a second, bright and white, then faded like it had used up the last of its shine. Without really deciding to, I looked down into the ditch. The beam barely reached the bottom, but what it caught was enough. A small pile of rocks, some old, some fresh. A little cross made of two weathered pieces of wood, the horizontal one nailed on crooked. No writing I could see from the car, just the shape. A roadside memorial. The kind you see a lot out here, if you know where to look. I snapped my eyes back to the road, heart thudding. I hadn't seen that in daylight. Maybe I'd missed it. Maybe someone had put it up recently, between my anxious day scout and this night. Either way, I suddenly didn't want to be out there. The next week I saw the rocks first, then the sign. The 23 was now almost level with the place where the county pavement started to think about being town. Not city limits, not even houses proper, but closer. Too close. The cold in my back had turned into a presence, like someone pacing me in that ditch, keeping perfect speed. I started telling myself I'd switch back to the main highway. It wasn't worth the extra worry. Every time, though, something came up. A late call, a shorter window, a promise to make it back in time for a bedtime story over video. The back road saved minutes. Minutes matter when that's all you get with your kid. Then came the night it reached my street. It was a Tuesday, which already made everything feel wrong. Custody exchanges were supposed to be Fridays, and sometimes Sundays. Middle of the week meant someone's schedule had blown up. I drove out edgy, half frustrated at my ex, half mad at myself for still caring so much about being exactly on time. The sky was clear. The air was sharp. The county road was empty in that way that makes it feel like the only real thing in the world. I did the drop-off. It was tense but quiet. No boyfriend. Just her, tired and distracted. We traded a few clipped words about school schedules and pickup times. Then I got back in my car, turned onto the highway, and then onto the back road a few miles later, my body already bracing for the familiar discomfort of the 23 stretch. I almost overshot it. The sign was closer than it had ever been. There was no gradual slide that night. No, I think it moved 10 yards. It was simply there, planted near a place it had never been, near the side road that led toward my neighborhood. My hands went cold on the wheel. I slowed down without thinking, eyes locked on the numbers as they flared back at me. The ditch beside it looked deeper than the usual runoff trench. Weeds stood tall, rattling in the breeze, skeletal fingers scraping against the metal post. For one terrible second, as my headlights swept past, I thought I saw something standing behind the sign. A smaller shape, just taller than the marker blurred by the motion. By the time I squinted, it was gone, or it had never been there. I drove the rest of the way home with that same weight pressing between my shoulders, refusing to look in the mirrors. Every bark of a dog, every crunch of gravel under my tires felt like footsteps getting closer. My driveway is nothing special. A strip of packed dirt leading up to a low house with a weak yellow porch light that always makes everything look a little sickly. I pulled onto it and killed the engine, sitting there for a second with my hand still on the wheel. I don't know what made me look back toward the road before I went inside. Habit, maybe. A lifetime of checking that I'd closed the garage, that I'd locked the car, that the world behind me was still where I'd left it. The 23 sign stood directly across from my driveway. Not down the road, not near the turn, right opposite my house on the other side of the 2-lane, its post planted in the shallow ditch that ran parallel to the asphalt. The reflective 23 caught my porch light and the dim glow of the nearest ranch security lamp, shining like fresh paint. Tire tracks led to it. Not old ones. Fresh grooves in the dirt shoulder, cutting off the pavement at a sharp angle and ending right at the base of the marker. The ground was chewed up as if someone had braked there, hard, then pulled away slowly. There was no car now, just the scars. And something else. In the weeds, half caught on a brittle stalk, lay a shoe. Small, scuffed. The kind a kid wears when they run around too much in the dirt. One strap torn. A little cartoon character on the side, almost worn away. It was damp from dew, not rain. There hadn't been any that day. For a few seconds, all I could do was stare. My brain tried to slot it into a normal story. Someone tossed laundry out of a passing truck, kids messing around. You're not the only parent in the world. But the tire tracks ending right there, at that post, wouldn't let that story stick. Behind me, my porch light buzzed. In the distance, a dog let out a string of barks, then went silent. I left the car door open, walked to the edge of my drive, and looked up and down the road. Empty. No headlights, no engines. Just the long, dark ribbon stretching both ways. I didn't touch the shoe. I backed up onto my own property until my shoes were on my gravel again, then went inside, shutting and locking the door with more force than necessary. The house felt smaller than usual, the walls too thin. Every creak in the old floorboards put my nerves on edge. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that 23 shining across from my house, like a bad spotlight. I finally dozed off sometime after 3, the TV still on low in the living room. The knock came at the time I usually passed mile marker 23 on Fridays. Tight, polite, 3-rap knock, not pounding, not frantic, just there. At the exact minute my brain associated with that cold stretch of county road. I woke up instantly. There's something about that sound in the dark, about knowing someone, or something, is on the other side of your door when you shouldn't be expecting anyone. The digital clock on the cable box glowed that familiar time at me. My mind did the math without my consent. If you'd taken the back road right now after a handoff, this is when you'd be passing the sign. Another 3 knocks. Same rhythm. My mouth went dry. My first thought was of my kid. Some emergency, something wrong. I grabbed my phone. No missed calls, no messages. I checked the peephole. Nothing. Just my own warped reflection around the fisheye edge and the weak halo of the porch light catching empty air. The knocks came again. Closer this time, somehow, like whoever was doing it had leaned in. "Who is it?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and rough in my own ears. Silence. I told myself it was some prank. Some idiot mixing up houses. Maybe a neighbor's teen being stupid. The rational part of my brain suggested opening the door and showing them a grown man wasn't in the mood. Another part of me, older, animal, begged me to deadbolt it and stand quietly till morning. In the end, I did neither. I just stood there, hand on the latch, listening. After a long stretch of nothing, I heard it. The faintest scrape, like fabric against wood sliding down the door. Then the sound of small feet stepping off the porch, not heavy, not adult, light. Gravel crunched in a tiny rhythm, moving away. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning light, the world looked aggressively normal. The 23 sign was gone. Not just relocated, not visible anywhere along the stretch I could see from my driveway. I walked to the edge of my property and scanned up and down the road. No mile marker 23. The dirt where it had stood was disturbed, as if something had been dug up, but there was no hole, no leftover post. The tire tracks remained, faint now under the early sun, but the numbers that had gleamed back at me the night before had disappeared. The shoe was still there. I should have picked it up, maybe, turned it over, looked for a name written on the inside, taken it to someone, asked if they'd heard anything about a kid on that road. Instead, I did what people sometimes do with things they don't know how to process. I went to work. I stuck to the main highway that day. I pretended nothing had happened. I don't use that county road anymore. I take the longer way, past the lights and the gas stations and the same 2 cop cars. I swallow my pride and my discomfort, so my kid doesn't ask me why I look wired when they get in the car. When people ask why I changed routes, I shrug and say the old pavement was tearing up my tires. Every now and then, though, if I'm outside at just the wrong time on a Friday, I'll feel it. I'll be taking the trash out or locking my car, the porch light buzzing overhead, dogs barking faint in the distance. The road will be quiet, no headlights in either direction, and at the exact minute I used to pass mile marker 23, I'll hear 3 soft knocks echo inside the house, even though I'm standing on the porch and no one is at the door. Just 3, polite, patient, like someone keeping to a schedule. I've checked more than once when sleep wouldn't come. The stretch of road where 23 used to be is still just road now, no memorial cross. No pile of rocks, no sign. People drive over it every day without thinking, coming and going, getting where they're going on time. Sometimes I wonder if that's the real horror, that for everyone else, it's just a mile that doesn't mean anything. And for me, it's the place where the road itself reached out and marked my house with its own number. Because out here, markers don't just tell you where you are. Sometimes, if you're not careful, they decide where you belong. Some roads never let you forget. Mine was a dusty stretch of Ajo Way out past the last reach of Tucson's lights. A place where the glow fades behind you. The desert turns to ink, and if you're lucky, your phone doesn't ring. But not all calls are meant to be missed. I'm Emery, rideshare driver, part-time college student, part-time insomniac. In Tucson, every driver knows the shape of West Ajo Way, city on one side, deep desert hush on the other. Rides along that corridor late at night are the bread and butter of app-based hustlers like me. Little risk, good mileage between pickups, customers who mostly want silence. But for months, Ajo Way meant grief every single time. My friend, let's call him my best friend because that's what he was the guy who got me into driving for extra cash. We split tips, shared war stories, challenged each other on fastest routes and worst passengers. He beat me by 2 whole months to diamond level. His laugh was the kind you could hear over any music, even with the windows down. And then, late last year, during a record stretch of cold, he picked up a fare scheduled for West Ajo, somewhere past the railroad overpass, past the edge of streetlights, after midnight. He texted the group chat one of his usual dumb memes. Guess which one is the murderer, wish me luck. And then wiped off the face of the planet. No ping, no dropped-off notification, nothing for days. Cops launched a shallow search, so did we, unofficially. We found nothing. His phone stayed dark. Most people said he left town. I didn't buy it. Not just because of friendship, but because on the night he disappeared. The last GPS trace was one tiny blip exactly on that overpass off West Ajo. Like he'd been erased from there. It changed me. But bills push you back on familiar roads. Grief melts into the usual grind. You suppress what twists your gut and keep hitting go online. 3 months after he vanished, something started happening. The first time was subtle. I was crossing that same overpass, sitter music behind me, when my phone screen lit up with incoming call. It was his number. I fumbled so hard I almost veered off the lane. The contact photo, him in a T-Rex onesie from a Halloween party, flashed like a sick joke above the slider. Here's the logic. Numbers get recycled. Robocalls hack private lines. Glitches repeat contacts from memory leaks. All that. But my brain went primal. Every hair on my arms lifted. I stabbed decline, muttering dead battery as an excuse to no one. But the pattern began. It wasn't every night, not even every week, but it was always only there, crossing that stretch between the city's last yellow streetlight and the start of pure desert dark. Sometimes I'd be with clients, sometimes alone. Unknown number, lit up the same way, and every time, in spite of myself, my eyes went to the time on the call, always matching the timestamp from the night my friend disappeared. 1:42 a.m. to the second. No voicemails, no missed call bubbles, just that single pulse of terror, then a vanishing ghost on my screen. Soon, routine became dread. Evenings started to warp around the drive out. My schedule shifted. I made up excuses to work the south side, pretended to be busy, but Tucson is a small town in a big desert, and all routes led back to Ajo after midnight. There was no logic to it. I swapped iPhones, deleted the app, wiped call logs. Everything, even my account, was fresh. Still the same call, always at the crossing, always the same time, always evaporating into dead air when declined. My friends, the few who knew, believed it was stress or algorithmic error, until one night a driver on our Slack admitted he'd seen that number ghost his screen too, just for a split second, passing right above the same bridge. Then it vanished from his recents like it never happened. I started dreaming of that number, waking up thinking my phone was vibrating on the pillow, convinced I'd missed something life and death. My hands would tingle for hours, adrenaline with nowhere to go. What finally broke me was a rideshare job, cold, clear night. Slow hours and not much to lose. The overpass was coming up. I felt the vibration before the ring. His face, his stupid Halloween costume filling my dash. This time, the call wouldn't fade. The screen stuck, tense, the phone refusing to go to home. I swerved and hit the rumble strips, the screen's blue-white glow painting the whole dark interior. I answered, whispering his name, half ashamed at how desperate I sounded. First, nothing but heavy breathing, a wet, ragged sound, gravel crunching as if someone was walking through rocks. Then my own voice came out of the speaker, warped, hollow, begging for help. Please, I heard it coming. I'm stuck. Please, anyone. It was unmistakably me, tone, cadence, the way I hold vowels when I'm tired or scared. I felt panic rip up my throat. What the hell was this? A recording. Had someone hacked voicemail? My old friend never used my exact speech, never. But there, crackling on a deadline at 1:42 in the morning, was the sound of Emery from the bottom of a hole. The next noise was static mixed with distant sirens, Tucson's familiar midnight soundtrack, but muffled, like through high walls or from way out in the washes. The call disconnected itself. The route map on my phone blanked out, glitched, and flashed back. No record of a ride logged on Ajo that night. My trip log said I was 3 miles away, running a fare in another part of town. I pulled over, heart hammering, the world sweating in a cold jacket. I scrolled, no history of the call, no voicemail, no trace. My hands stuttered on the touchscreen's cold glass. I scoured every folder, app, and setting. Nothing. Later that night, I got a text, and this somehow was the worst of all. No number, no sender, just the familiar green bubble with 4 words. Don't leave me here. I tried blocking the number, changing SIMs and reporting security issues to the platform. Tech support shrugged. Maybe some app in the background, maybe a bug, maybe stress hallucinations. I drove Ajo way less, started pushing for northside jobs, avoiding late runs. But, bill by bill, I circled back. Desert opens up fast after you cross the city line, and the only way back is through the dark. The air felt electric between the end of the last streetlight and the moment the call might hit. I stopped answering, but that made it worse. The vibration crept up my wrist, a flutter followed by pure dread. Screen illuminating my own face, timestamp 1:42. Thin blue bar of the call refusing to leave the dash. 3 weeks later, I picked up a quiet fare, a woman in a service uniform, dead tired, her silence louder than words. We made small talk, the weather, the shift work, the way that part of Tucson got so empty after midnight, you felt swallowed by the night. As I reached the overpass, my phone froze to the call again, my friend's number on the screen. I tried to ignore it. The woman leaned forward, voice soft. "You should answer. Somebody needs to say goodbye." The words hit like a jolt. I snapped up the call with a trembling thumb. Static. Rumble of tires. The faint thump of heartbeats. You know when a phone mic presses against someone's chest. Then finally, in my own voice, breaking, "I'm scared." It unraveled me. Tears and shivering, and a need, almost childish, for someone to reach across the unreal line between dead signal and living person. "You're not alone," I said. Breathing, my own. Overlapping, echoing, as if I was standing outside my body. Then, faint in the background, my friend's laugh. One quick bittersweet burst of joy, the one that used to make drive-through clerks look up and smile. Only once, then it faded, and the call dropped off into silence for good. After that, the phone stopped ringing. I still cross that stretch, but it feels lighter, like air returning to a room after a long storm. Sometimes, on the city edge, I look up in the mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of that face again. Not for fear this time, but gratitude. That after all the calls we're forced to ignore, some part of us is allowed to answer. On Ajo Way, after Tucson's last light, a missed call is never just a glitch. And sometimes the best thing you can do, the only thing that sets you free, is to pick up and say goodbye. Some checkpoints are meant to slow you down. This one felt like it was deciding whether I should be allowed to go any farther at all. By the time I realized what was wrong with those officers on the pre-dawn highway, I was already parked in their lights with nowhere to go. My name is Massimo, and I've been running long haul since before a lot of these new guys knew how to double clutch. You learn the skeleton of the Southwest by feel when you drive it enough, where the wind shoves you sideways, where the pavement ripples, where the legit checkpoints sit with their dogs and floodlights and bored agents. The stretch between Yuma and Organ Pipe is one of those in-between places, far enough from town that the dark feels thick, close enough to the border that you're used to being watched. That night, I was hauling sealed medical cargo on a tight timetable. Pre-dawn, sky that flat, dead blue that comes before sunrise, when the stars are hanging on but all the edges of the world are bleeding in. The highway ran ahead of me in a hollow lane of headlight, yellow lines slipping under my bumper in a steady stream. Out there, it's mostly nothing. Low scrub, the suggestion of distant hills, the black silhouettes of saguaros if the moon's got any strength left. The official checkpoints on that run are like landmarks to me. There's comfort in the routine. Cones, signs, rumble strips, the slow crawl past board uniforms, and sleepy dogs. They're on the map. They're in the logs. Dispatch knows where you'll be stopped and when. So when I came over a low rise and saw a cluster of lights that shouldn't have been there, it put a small crack in that comfort. It looked right at first glance. Bright white floods fanned out across the asphalt, catching dust in the beams. Cones pinched the lanes into one path. A couple of portable light towers stood like thin-legged cranes above it all. A sign flashed in my high beams. Orange diamond, checkpoint ahead, reflective tape blazing. I checked the dash. No notes in the onboard. No warning of a pop-up. Sometimes they set up temporary things for incidents, sure, but I'd usually hear something through the grapevine. Still, you see lights, cones, and uniforms, you slow down. That's just how it works. The truck began to descend toward the pool of brightness. My headlights became pointless against the wall of white flooding the road ahead. Outside that circle of illumination, the desert went completely black, as if someone had cut the world off just beyond their reach. My tires hit the rumble strips. The familiar vibrating growl shook through the cab, low and insistent. Engine idled down as I eased off the throttle. The radio murmured some overnight talk show, a voice that had been keeping me company for an hour. As I got closer, the signal fuzzed, ate its own words, then dissolved into a soft hiss. The first figure stepped into the lane, raising a hand. Uniform, at least at a distance. Dark green shape against the white glare, reflective bands catching light in short flashes. The person was tall, shoulders squared, face completely washed out in the intensity of the floods. I could see the outline of a cap, something like the typical Border Patrol silhouette, but any details blurred into featureless white. I rolled down my window a few inches as I brought the rig to a stop where they indicated. Cold air knifed into the cab, sharper than the outside temperature should have warranted. The engine settled into a heavy idle, the low diesel thrumming up through the steering column. The officers stepped closer to my door. For a moment, the angle of the flood behind them turned their entire front into a flat shadow. Then they leaned in, and their face moved out of the worst of the backlight. I've seen tired faces. I've seen new recruits and lifers, hard lines and soft, tanned and pale. This one was wrong in a way that didn't register all at once. The skin looked thinned out. Too even, no variation, no texture. Pale, yeah, but not the kind you get from office work. More like the color of wax a little too close to a flame. The eyes were in the right place, dark under the brim of the cap, but there was something off about how they fixed on me. Too still. No little muscle tremors around them, no blinks in those first few seconds. Evening, I said, because that's what you say, even though technically it was closer to morning. The officer's mouth moved. I heard nothing. For a second, I thought the engine had drowned them out. I dialed my window another notch, tilted my head. The diesel's rumble was normal, the faint whoosh of the fan pushing air through the vents steady. My ears worked fine. Origin and destination, they repeated. I hadn't caught the first part. The words sounded right, but there was something strange under them, like an echo that didn't match, delayed half a beat and coming from just behind my left ear instead of in front of me. Yuma to the hospital in Tucson, I answered. Sealed medical load. You'll have it in the system. Their gaze flicked toward the trailer in one smooth motion, then back to me. Manifest? I handed over my paperwork, watched their gloved hand take it. The glove moved oddly, the fabric not creasing, right where fingers should bend. They glanced down at the forms, eyes scanning, lips moving, just enough to show they were reading silently. The floodlights made the veins at their temples stand out like blue lines drawn too carefully. Behind them, two more figures walked along the passenger side of my truck, flashlights pointed at the tires. Their beams jerked in a perfectly synchronized arc, left to right to left, as though someone had mirrored a video and played both at once. When they turned in the same rhythm. Not just trained, unnaturally synced. You're ahead of schedule, the officer at my window said. I blinked. What? Early, they said, a fraction more distinctly. You left Yuma 15 minutes late. You are on schedule for a 6:10 delivery, yet you are here now. I hadn't mentioned my timetable. My hand on the wheel tightened. Traffic's been light, I offered. Tailwind. That should have earned at least a flicker of amusement. Nothing changed in their expression. Please cut the engine, they said. Step out of the vehicle. There are moments when your body knows something is off before your brain can find the words. This was one of them. A prickle ran from the base of my skull down my spine. You can't refuse a stop like this without making it worse, so I did what I've done 100 times. Put the truck in neutral, set the brake, flipped the engine off. The sudden quiet was a little jarring after hours of constant noise. Except it wasn't really quiet. The floods hummed, a high electric buzz under the surface. Somewhere, A generator rattled steadily. I could hear the small ticks of my engine cooling, metal contracting. I'd never heard those at a checkpoint before. There's usually too much else going on. I stepped down from the cab. Cold hit harder outside, settling into my bones. The air smelled faintly of dust and something chemical, a sharp, clean odor that made the back of my throat itch. Looking around, the setup seemed legit. Cones, signs, a row of heavy sawhorses with reflective tape. A small structure past the lights, maybe a mobile office, squatted off to one side. But the longer I looked, the more little wrong notes I found. No other vehicles. Not in front of me, not behind. No waiting line, no red brake lights in the distance. For a stretch of highway that usually saw a decent number of trucks even in the dead hours, that was weird. No dogs. No casual chatter between agents. No radios crackling. The only sounds were the artificial ones. The hum of the lights. The low grind of the generator. The two officers who'd been walking along my trailer had reached the back doors. They stood on either side of the latch, heads tilted like they were listening to water in pipes. Their postures were identical. Even their shoulders rose and fell in the same measure when they breathed. The one at my window walked me toward the rear of the rig. Up close, the proportions of their face bothered me in a way I couldn't pin down. The cheekbones were there, the jawline, the curve of the ear, but they seemed arranged with just enough imprecision that my brain kept trying to correct them. "What are you hauling tonight?" they asked. "Like I said," I answered, forcing my voice to stay even. "Medical, sealed, paperwork's in your hand." "We will need to see inside the trailer," they said. That made me pause. "You break that seal without cause," I said slowly, "and you're explaining it to the consignee and my dispatcher. There are protocols." Their head tilted just a fraction. "There is cause," they said. "We need to see what you are bringing through here. There have been irregularities." The way they said irregularities scratched at something in the back of my mind, like hearing your own language through a bad translator. "Then you have the paperwork to match," I said. "You log the inspection. You note the seal number. We do this above board." For a heartbeat, the three of them, window officer and the two at the back, were completely still. It felt like the whole checkpoint held its breath. Then the one with my forms looked down at them again, eyes tracking the lines. Their lips moved soundlessly. When they looked back up, the expression they wore was something I've seen on people going through the motions without understanding. A teacher reciting a script in a language they don't quite speak. "Yes," they said. "Of course, procedures." They walked to the back, stood between the other two. "Seal integrity must be checked," they said. One of the others raised a flashlight, angled it at the latch. The beam hit the metal, revealing the numbered tag crimped in place, intact. The light didn't waver. The officer stared for a long moment, then turned the beam slightly, catching the numbers. "Confirmed," they said. "Seal is unbroken." They spoke like they'd just read a phrase off a card. "That's what I've been saying," I answered. "So we're done here?" Their eyes snapped to mine. "Not yet," they said. "You have been stopping." The word landed wrong. "I've been what?" "Stopping," they repeated. "We have a record of you being here before, slowing, stopping, without us." Every hair on my arms rose at once. Behind the officer, the two others had turned their faces toward me, in perfect unison, as if pulled on a single string. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "This checkpoint wasn't here last week." "You were," they said. For a second, everything in my field of vision seemed to sharpen. The dust motes in the bright air, the faint frost of my breath, the texture of the officer's glove fingers. My mind scrambled for some explanation. Maybe they'd had a temporary stop in the past I'd forgotten. Maybe I'd slowed for an accident. Maybe... "Look," I said more sharply than I meant to. "If there is a problem, write it up, scan the cargo, do what you need to do. Otherwise, I need to be on the road. Those pallets don't unload themselves." The officer with my papers blinked once, finally, like a signal being reset. "You may proceed," they said. Slowly, they handed my manifest back. Their hand was colder than it should have been, even through the glove. The paper felt slightly damp where their fingers had held it, though their skin looked dry. I climbed back into the cab, acutely aware of all three of them watching me. The engine coughed, then rumbled back to life under my feet. I put the truck in gear, rolled forward, as directed. The path through the cones narrowed, bringing me closer to the lights. For a moment, everything outside the windshield was white glare and shadows at the edges. As I reached the end of the makeshift corridor, I glanced in the side mirror. The three figures stood in a neat row by the rear of my trailer, all facing my truck, motionless. The floods behind them washed their features out, leaving only dark shapes where eyes and mouths should be. Beyond the reach of the light, the desert was pure, absolute black. I turned my eyes back to the road. A portable sign on a stand flashed by. "Thank you for your cooperation," in bold black letters. After that, the darkness swallowed me again. The only illumination was my own headlights and the distant, pale hint of dawn starting to think about rising. The radio snapped back on by itself, mid-sentence, the talk show host laughing at a joke I'd missed. My hands were tight on the wheel. I drove on, trying to slow my breathing, telling myself it was just a late-season crew, maybe new hires from somewhere else, maybe a training op. 10 miles down, the official checkpoint came into view. That one I recognized immediately. The infrastructure built into the land, permanent signs, the familiar slump of the small building off to the side. A few semis idled in the approach lanes, red brake lights glowing. Dogs moved between them with their handlers, tails up, noses working. It looked like it always had. I pulled into the designated lane, let the truck roll to a crawl. When it was my turn, the agent who stepped up to my window had the usual look, tired but human, lines at the corners of the mouth, a bit of stubble catching the sodium vapor light. "Evening," he said. "Citizenship?" "U.S.," I replied. "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed?" he asked, glancing at my manifest as I handed it over. "Yuma to Tucson," I said. "Medical hall." He scanned the paperwork, then looked up again. "You the only one in the cab?" he asked. "Always," I said. He gave a faint half-smile. "All right. Sit tight a second." He walked to the back, checked the seal. The dog with him sniffed around the tires, then sat down, uninterested. The agent called to a colleague, exchanged a few quiet words, walked back to my window. "You're good," he said, handing me the manifest. "You run through earlier." I shook my head. "Just now." He frowned slightly, glancing at something on a handheld device clipped to his vest. "Huh," he said. "Tracker's got you slowed down for a good few minutes about 15 miles back, but there's nothing there. You pull over for anything?" My mouth went dry. "No," I said. "Didn't stop. Road was clear." He studied my face for a moment, then gave a little shrug, like it wasn't worth pushing. "Happens sometimes," he said. "Glitches. Have a good one." He slapped the side of the cab twice and waved me through. As I eased back onto the throttle, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Eyes a little too wide, jaw set tighter than I like. The rest of the run into Tucson was uneventful on the surface. Dawn finally broke. The sky went from that washed-out blue to pale orange at the horizon. The world filled in details again. Individual shrubs, fence posts, the occasional billboard. I delivered the cargo, signed off with the receiving crew, got the usual half-hearted thanks from people who'd see 100 more pallets that day. Back at the yard that afternoon, exhausted but too wired to sleep, I hooked my dash cam up to a monitor. Part of me hoped I'd see the scene exactly as I remembered it, that the floodlit checkpoint had been real, that the unnatural officers had been caught in at least a frame or two, that I could show someone and say, "Look, this is what I stopped for." The footage played back in jittery, time-stamped clarity. Highway, darkness, my own headlights making that familiar tunnel of light. Time code crawling forward, matching the stretch when I'd first seen the extra lights up ahead. The road glowed in front of me. The horizon rose, then fell as I drove that low hill. The place where the checkpoint should have come into view stayed empty. No cones, no towers, no floods. My speed dropped on the overlay, from 60 to 50 to 30 to 0. The tack needle fell as I idled, then hit off. The camera kept rolling. In the video, my truck sat dead still in the middle of the highway, hazard lights off, no other vehicles passing. Inside the cab, the interior camera showed me unbuckling, opening the door, climbing down, into nothing. Just the vague smear of pre-dawn gloom. No officers, no structures, no extra lights. Outside sounds picked up on the mic were only the steady hush of the wind, a distant coyote calling once, then silence. My truck sat there for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. At the 6-minute mark, something flickered at the far edge of the frame. A smudge of light, like a car cresting the hill, then gone. I rewound it 3 times. It stayed indistinct, no shape, no color, just a pulse. Near the end, my own figure climbed back into the cab. I sat for a long heartbeat, hands on the wheel, staring ahead at the same empty road. Then the engine roared to life, my speed climbed, and the highway rolled out under me again. I watched the segment twice more, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes. You see a lot of things on the road that don't make it into reports. That's not about ghosts or conspiracies. It's about people being tired and systems being imperfect. But this was something else. Here, there was a record, a blank space where there should have been a lot of noise. I considered marching the footage into a supervisor's office, demanding to know what kind of unofficial operation they'd signed me over to. But what would I be showing them, really? A truck stopped in the middle of nowhere, its driver climbing in and out like an idiot. No cones, no uniforms, no checkpoint. Just me and an invisible delay. Instead, I copied the video onto a private drive, shoved it in my locker, and went back to work. Since that night, I've run that route more times than I can count. The pre-dawn highway between Yuma and Organ Pipe looks the way it always has, long, flat, indifferent. The official checkpoint is still where it's supposed to be, logs lined up neatly, agents who crack jokes and wave you through when the dogs don't care. But there's a stretch, about 15 miles before you hit that station, where I feel my hands tighten on the wheel every time. It always looks the same, low hill, open land, a faint suggestion of saguaros in the dark. My speed drops a little just out of habit, then picks back up. The radio might fuzz for a second. The sky might seem lighter or darker than it should. I don't stop there anymore. If I feel tired, I push to the next pullout with a real sign, a real trash can, evidence that someone else has been there. Once in a while, though, when the air is very still and the stars are mostly gone but the sun hasn't yet made its claim, the horizon ahead of me seems to swim. For a heartbeat, I think I see the ghost of orange diamonds and pale figures standing shoulder to shoulder in borrowed uniforms, waiting quietly in a pool of floodlight for a truck to roll into their little pocket of unreality. When that happens, I keep my eyes on the lane lines, keep my foot steady, and count my breaths until the feeling passes. Checkpoints are supposed to be places where you're accounted for, where someone marks that you were here, at this time, in this vehicle. That's the trade, a little of your movement in exchange for a little of their security. But that night between Yuma and Organ Pipe, something else took inventory of me. Looked at my route, my cargo, even the way I'd stopped there before, and left no official mark at all. And the part that still unnerves me more than anything is simple. On every screen that matters, I was never there. Some accident scenes never happened in this world the way you see them. Out near Sierra Vista, there's a wash I keep getting sent to, and every time a storm rolls in, part of me wonders if I'm answering the same call over and over, just from a different side of it. My name is Trenton, and I've been an EMT in Cochise County long enough to know what a bad sky looks like. The desert talks before it hits you. The smell of wet dust shows up first, Then the wind changes, then the horizon starts strobing with heat lightning over the Huachucas. On the night I first saw the convoy in the arroyo, Sierra Vista had that feeling, like the whole valley was taking a breath and holding it. We'd been getting flash flood warnings all afternoon. Out here, dry washes can go from sand to death trap in minutes. People who move in from out of state never believe it until a wall of water takes their truck. Dispatch was jumpy on the radio, repeating the same lines. Avoid low crossings. Don't drive around barricades. Look before you cross the wash. By midnight, the worst of the system was still hanging off to the west, grumbling. The air had that charged taste, like metal on your tongue. I was sitting in the rig with my partner at the base, half listening to the scanner, half scrolling on my phone, trying not to think about how tired I was of energy drinks and gas station sandwiches. The call came through like any other. Possible rollover, unknown injuries, vehicle in arroyo off the dirt road by Curry Draw, caller lost contact, line dropped. My partner and I exchanged a look. We both knew that crossing. Locals use that dirt road as a shortcut between town and some of the ranches. It drops down into a wide wash, steep sandy banks on either side, the kind that looks solid until it isn't. In monsoon season, it's a coin flip any time you try it. We rolled. Siren off, lights on. At that hour, there's no traffic to fight. The city dropped away behind us fast, sodium lamps giving up to empty dark. The Huachucas were just a black sawtooth ridge against a flickering sky. Every time lightning ripped across the clouds, it turned the world into a negative for a heartbeat. White sand, black bushes, chrome flash on fences. The smell hit us a mile out. Wet creosote, dust starting to lift. The first drops of rain that hadn't quite committed yet. Wind funneled down the low spots, pushing at the side of the rig. The radio kept chattering about watches and warnings, a constant drone under our own engine. We turned off the pavement onto the dirt, tires thumping over the change from asphalt to packed earth. This road was nothing fancy. 2 ruts, a suggestion of a crown in the middle, scrub on either side. It sloped gently down for a bit, then dropped more sharply into the arroyo. Last chance to turn around, my partner said, half joking. Caller said roll over in the wash, I answered. If someone's upside down in there, we're what they get. He didn't argue. That's the thing about this job. You can complain, you can crack jokes, but when the tones drop, you go. As we approached, I could see the wash opening up in front of us, a pale swath of sand and rock cutting across the darker ground. Steep banks on both sides, maybe 10, 12 feet high. In daylight, kids play down in there. At night, it looks like the mouth of something. Any standing water? I asked, squinting through the windshield. My partner leaned forward, scanning. Looks dry, he said. Surface is dark but not moving. I eased the rig down the slope. The tires slipped a little on loose sand, then caught. The headlights swept across the bottom. Empty. No rolled vehicle, no debris, no twisted guardrail or skid marks. Just the usual pocked, uneven surface of the arroyo floor. Tire tracks from earlier trucks etched in, crisscrossed by animal prints. I brought us to a stop in the middle, engine idling. The cab filled with the sound of distant thunder and the soft hiss of wind funneled along the draw. Unit on scene, I said into the radio. No visual on any wreck. Crossing is dry at this time. Dispatch came back after a beat. Copy. No visual. Caller's number going straight to voicemail. Can you check up and downstream? Confirm nothing in the cut? Affirmative, I replied. We got out. The air down in the wash was cooler, the sand radiating some of the day's heat back up into the wind. The banks rose around us like walls, studded with roots and rocks. I could smell the promise of rain stronger down there, like the air remembered every flood that had ever come through. We split. My partner walked a little upstream, flashlight beam carving out patches of sand and brush, looking for fresh drag marks or shine-off metal. I went downstream, boots sinking an inch or two into softer patches, the beam of my light jittering over the contours. No fresh gouges where something big had hit. No fresh glass. A couple of old beer cans half buried. A sun-bleached tire half hidden under a tumble of branches. Trash that had been there long before tonight. Lightning flickered again, the thunder following quicker now. The wind kicked up, bringing with it a stronger smell of wet earth. Still no sign that a truck or SUV had gone over recently. "Nothing," my partner called back. His voice echoed weirdly between the banks. "Same," I answered. We stood there for a moment, both of us looking up at the slice of sky. Dark, no stars, lightning skittering behind thick clouds. I could feel the first drops now, big fat splats on my face and the back of my neck, the kind that leaves spots on your shirt. "We should get out of here," I said. "If it hits hard, this is the last place we want to be." He didn't argue. We climbed back into the rig and eased up the opposite bank, engine straining a little against the incline and the shifting sand. At the top, the tires hit firmer dirt again. I stopped there and took one last look down, scanning with the flashlight through the open window. The wash stared back, empty and quiet, waiting. We cleared the scene with dispatch. No contact, no evidence of a crash, probable false report, or mislocated caller. It happens more than people think. Someone sees headlights dip, hears a weird noise, panics, calls a generic "car in the wash," and their phone dies. By the time we get there, it's just dark and imagination. We turned back toward town. About halfway up the dirt road, the rain started in earnest. Not a gentle sprinkle, a sudden hard drumming on the roof of the rig. The windshield wipers went from occasional swipe to full-on struggle. The smell of wet dust hit like somebody had broken a bag of cement open in front of my face. "Look at that," my partner muttered, glancing in the side mirror at the wash behind us. 5 more minutes down there, and we'd have been swimming. He wasn't wrong. Water eats those arroyos fast. We crawled along for a bit, cautious. Lightning was hitting closer now. The thunder rolled right on its heels, making the windows rattle. I was just starting to relax into that weird calm that comes once you've cleared a scene and realized you're not going to be dragging someone out of a twisted cab tonight, when something ahead grabbed my attention. Lights. Lots of them. They were down and to the right, lower than the level of the road, which meant they were in the arroyo. For a split second, I thought it was just the storm reflecting off wet surfaces. Then the shapes resolved in my mind. Headlights, taillights, hazard flashers, all clustered together in that narrow cut. "Do you see that?" I asked, already easing off the gas. My partner leaned forward, squinting past the rain. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That wasn't there 5 minutes ago." I pulled us over onto the shoulder and killed our own lights for a moment, just to see better. The night dimmed around us, leaving the cluster of lights ahead and below burning like a little city. A line of vehicles sat down in the wash. Old trucks from the shape of them. Vans, maybe 1 or 2 larger transports. Their headlights shone in scattered directions, some aimed up at the banks, some down the length of the arroyo. A few hazard flashers ticked out of sync. Amber and red reflecting off the damp sand and rock. Through the rain, I could just make out silhouettes behind some windshields. People, seated, still. "Dispatch," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "This is Unit on Curry Draw Road. We are seeing multiple vehicles down in the arroyo, lights on, possible mass casualty. No earlier report on these. Please confirm if any units have eyes on from other side." Static answered for a second. Then the familiar voice came back, sounding suddenly more awake. "Negative, Unit. No calls about multiple vehicles. Your last transmission cleared the scene. No activity. Are you certain you're seeing vehicles in the wash?" I stared at the lights. "Affirmative," I said. "At least 6. Trucks and vans. Lights on. Appear occupied." "We're going to approach." We rolled forward until the road tipped down toward the crossing again. The rain hammered harder, bouncing off the hood and splashing up from the ground. I turned our own emergency lights back on, red and white strobes flickering against the wet world. As we descended, the view expanded. The vehicles were arranged almost neatly, nose to tail, like they'd tried to line up or had been forced into that configuration by the narrowing sides of the wash. Some sat higher, wheels still mostly on dry sand. Others were lower, in the deepest cut, where any serious flow would hit first. Figures sat in the driver's seats of several. I could see the dark ovals of heads, the hint of shoulders. Nobody moved. Adrenaline hit, sharp and clean. This was the thing we trained for. The nightmare scenario. Multiple vehicles caught by a sudden surge, people trapped, time running out with every second of rain. I parked the rig at the top of the bank, set the brake, and grabbed the radio mic again. We have visual on multiple vehicles in the arroyo, I repeated, initiating contact, requesting backup and fire, potential swift water response if the wash activates. Copy unit, dispatch said. Be advised, radar shows cell intensifying. Use extreme caution. We knew. We got out into a wall of sound, rain on metal, wind threading through the sparse brush, thunder cracking close enough to make my chest vibrate. The smell of wet earth was so strong it was almost choking. We hurried down the bank, boots slipping in the slick sand, flashlights cutting through sheets of water. Every instinct screamed at me to move fast, and at the same time not to put one foot wrong. The bottom of the wash was already darker where the first water was soaking in. EMS, I shouted, voice fought by the storm. If you can hear me, honk or wave. No response, no horns. The only answer was the continued pulse of hazard lights, relentlessly blinking. We reached the first truck, an old pickup with peeling paint and a long bed. The engine wasn't running, but the battery still had enough juice to power the lights. I shone my flashlight through the driver's window. A figure sat behind the wheel, hands on the top of the steering wheel, head bowed slightly forward. "Sir," I yelled over the rain, "can you hear me?" No movement, no flinch, no sign of breathing, even if the angle made it hard to tell. I tried the door. My hand closed on the handle and passed straight through it. For a split second, my brain refused to accept what my hand told it. I'd been expecting cold metal, resistance, that little sticky give older doors have. Instead, my fingers met something that felt like thick, cold air, like a dense fog. The handle looked solid. It just wasn't. I jerked my hand back on reflex. The flashlight beam shook across the glass. The figure in the driver's seat remained perfectly still, the identical hazard flash reflecting off the inside. My partner was at the next vehicle, a white van with no markings. I heard him swear, his voice coming out higher than usual. "Trent," he called. "Something's wrong. I can't get a grip on the door. It's like it's not there." I forced myself to touch the truck again, slowly this time, palm flat. My skin met the window, kind of. There was a sensation of pressure, like pushing against the surface of very cold water without breaking it. But no hard texture, no defined edges. I pressed harder. My hand slid forward, through where the glass should have been, and into air that burned with cold. My light beam followed my arm. From this angle, it illuminated the driver's face. Except it wasn't a face in the way it should have been. It was a hint of one. Features blurred, like a photograph left in the sun too long. Eyes, dark hollows. Mouth, a pale line. The impression of clothing, but no detail. Like someone had sketched a person and then smudged all the lines. I yanked my arm back as if I'd been shocked. My heart was pounding so hard it made spots dance at the edges of my vision. "Back up," I yelled to my partner. "Get back up the bank. Now." I don't think he'd ever heard that tone from me. He didn't argue. We scrambled up the slope, boots slipping, breath burning, rain stabbing at our faces. At the top, I dared to look back. The line of vehicles was still there, sitting in the wash, lights unwavering. For a moment, lightning lit the whole scene in blinding white. In that frozen flash, the wash wasn't dry. Water roared through the arroyo, a churning, frothing wall, halfway up the doors of the trucks and vans. The vehicles leaned slightly, straining against the current. Figures inside pressed against the glass, mouths open in silent screams, hands slapping against invisible barriers. Water surged around them, carrying branches, debris, an entire world of deadly motion. Then darkness slammed back in. The thunder that followed cracked almost on top of it, shaking the ground. In the afterimage, my brain insisted the vehicles were still half submerged, but when my vision cleared, the wash was as dry as it had been when we first checked it. Sand, rocks, old tire impressions, no moving water, no wave. The trucks and vans were still there, though. Lights, blinkers, motionless shapes behind smeared glass. My radio crackled in my hand, making me jump. "Unit on Curry Draw," dispatch said, voice urgent. "Radar shows heavy cell directly over your location with potential for flash flooding. If you are in the wash, you need to exit immediately. Repeat, exit the wash now." "We're out," I said, my throat tight. At the top of the bank, multiple visuals in the arroyo, unsure of status. There was a long pause, longer than it should have taken to process that. "Repeat last," dispatch asked. I closed my eyes for a second, opened them, looked again. The wash was empty. No trucks, no vans, no hazard lights. Just the faint ghost of our own headlights reflected off damp sand, the sides of the arroyo already showing new streaks where water had started to carve thin channels. "We have no vehicles in sight," I said slowly. "Crossing is clear. We're remaining out of the wash per your advisory." After we got back to base, soaked and jumpy, we did what everyone does with something that doesn't fit. We tried to explain it away. We talked about lightning tricks, about adrenaline, about seeing headlights reflected from somewhere else. We talked about tired eyes and the way rain can make shapes dance where there are none. Then one of the older medics, who'd been half listening from the doorway, said, "You were at Curry Draw tonight." "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He hesitated, then stepped in, pulling the door shut behind him like he didn't want the conversation leaking into the hall. "There was a convoy that got caught there," he said quietly. "Years back, before you came on. Trucks, vans, people packed in, trying to make it through before the storm hit. They misjudged it. Wall of water took 'em. They pulled bodies out for 2 days. Some they never found." The room felt suddenly smaller. "What night was it?" I asked. He met my eyes for a second, then looked away. "Same date," he said. "Different year. Storm like this one. Same wash." I didn't have anything to say to that. Later, when the worst of the weather had passed and the adrenaline had worn off into a bone-deep exhaustion, I drove out there in daylight, on my own time. The arroyo looked like any other, scarred banks. Driftwood lodged high in branches as proof of past floods. Fine silt smoothed in some areas like dried riverbeds. There were no tire tracks from a line of vehicles. No twisted metal half buried in the sand. No crosses or markers that I could see, though those are easy to miss if people want them to be. If you stand on the bank and close your eyes, you can hear things. The wind, birds, the distant hum of someone's truck on a different road. If a storm is coming, you can smell the wet dust miles before the first drop lands. If you ask me whether I trust my eyes now, I'd tell you this. I trust that they show me something that feels real. I don't trust that it always belongs to the moment I'm standing in. Since that night, every time the sky over the Huachucas goes black and the weather service starts barking about flash floods, my stomach knots. When the tones drop and the call includes the words arroyo and rollover, I feel my hands go cold even before we're in the rig. I've been back to Curry Draw on other nights. I've crossed that wash when it's bone dry and when there's a polite little trickle cutting across the bottom. I've stood there with my boots in the sand watching the clouds gather, telling myself that lightning can't strike twice in the same story. But a couple of times right before a storm breaks, I've looked down from the road and seen a faint glimmer low in the arroyo. Not bright, not defined, just the impression of multiple lights hovering for a moment in a formation that could be trucks and vans if you wanted it to be. If I blink or look away, they're gone. I don't go down there when that happens. I stay on the bank, radio in hand, ready to answer whatever version of the call we get this time. Maybe it'll be a real truck, a real overturned SUV, real people we can actually pull out and save. Or maybe, again, it'll be something else replaying under the sand, something that only becomes visible when the air tastes like rain, and the desert remembers the night it took more than it meant to. People like to say the desert keeps its secrets. That's true. But sometimes, on certain roads, in certain washes, just before the flood, it turns its memories into lights and lines of metal and silent shapes behind glass, and lets you see exactly how wrong things can go. You can call it a vision, a glitch, leftover trauma from some story I heard and forgot. You can say I was tired, that lightning and rain play tricks on depth perception. I've heard all that. I've tried telling it to myself. What I can't shake is the feel of my hand passing through a door handle that looked perfectly solid, into cold that was more like river water than air. Or the way those hazard lights kept blinking, perfectly steady, even when the wash was empty, and the only real flashing in the world was from our own rig on dry sand. The next time I get sent out there in a storm, I know I'll go. That's the job. But I also know that when I see lights in the wash, I'll have to decide which world I'm stepping into, the one where I can open doors and pull people out, or the one where I'm just walking through someone else's last night, doomed to watch it play out and vanish in a single blink. What goes through your mind when something in the dark matches every move of your vehicle, even though the map says there's nothing there? That's what I asked myself on that maintenance road near Sasabi, with the border fence on one side and something impossible keeping pace on the other. My name is Fallon. I've been driving dirt tracks and ranch roads along this part of the Arizona-Mexico line since before I was old enough to do it legally. Out here, the fence isn't an abstract political argument. It's a constant humming presence in your peripheral vision. You learn where the official patrol roads are, where the ranch easements cut across, and which shortcuts everyone swears by even if they're not technically meant for us. The maintenance road I took that night was one of those gray area routes. It ran tight along the fence, so tight you could have thrown a rock through the slats into Mexico if you felt like causing trouble. I'd always avoided it, more out of habit than fear, but a neighbor finally talked me into it after a long day fixing downed panels. "You'll save half an hour easy," he said, leaning on his own truck. "It's graded smooth, and at night, Border Patrol doesn't care as long as you're not doing anything stupid." I was tired. My shoulders ached from hauling wire and posts. The thought of shaving miles off the return sounded good. I told myself I'd only use it this once in the name of an early shower and a real meal. By the time I turned onto the maintenance road, full dark had settled in. Behind me, the last hints of sun had long since drained out of the sky. Ahead, the night pressed close, only held back by my headlights. The fence rose on my right in tall steel segments, groaning faintly whenever the wind pushed against it. Farther away, occasional floodlight towers swept their beams in slow, lazy arcs, painting bands of pale over the desert, and then moving on. My old pickup grumbled along at a steady pace, tires crunching over packed dirt and scattered gravel. I cracked the window an inch for the familiar mix of smells: dust, faint exhaust, dry plants bruised by the day's heat. On the left, the land rolled away into low hills and washes. On the right, beyond the fence, the Mexican side dropped off more steeply in places, but most of it was just layers of shadow. For a while, it was the kind of drive I'd done 100 times, monotonous, almost soothing. The fence posts flicked past like the ribs of some huge creature. The occasional dust devil spun through my beams, kicked up by wind funnels, then fell apart again. I first noticed it as just a difference in the dark. Something along the far side of the fence seemed thicker, a patch of black that didn't behave like the rest. It was alongside me, out beyond the slats, just at the edge of where my headlights faded out. I'd seen my share of coyotes and strays pacing a truck's light cone before, so my brain went there first. Except this shape was too big, too long. When I eased off the gas a touch, the truck losing a few miles an hour, the dark patch eased too, staying exactly opposite my door. When I let the truck pick up speed again, it matched that, yard for yard. I frowned, leaning a little toward the windshield. The fence between us threw striped shadows, cutting my view into vertical slices. In those gaps, as the posts flickered by, I caught glimpses of that darkness holding steady on the other side, like it was tethered to me. I told myself it was some weird trick of my own lights on uneven ground. Maybe my beams were catching a cut in the terrain just right. Maybe I was seeing my own shadow thrown out and distorted. I nudged the truck a little farther left in the lane, increasing the distance between me and the fence. The angle shifted, the slats lined up differently. The shape shifted perfectly with me, keeping the same space, neither closing in nor drifting away. My hand tightened on the wheel. There's a voice you develop living out here, the one that talks you down when your imagination wants to go feral. It reminded me that if there was anything real moving on that side, people, a stray cow, a patrol vehicle, I'd hear more than just my own engine and the low drone of the fence. I flipped the radio off anyway, letting the cab fall into the raw sounds of the night. The tires crunched. Something loose in the glove box rattled. Wind whispered against the glass. From outside, far off, I caught the occasional yip of some animal I couldn't place. I rolled the window all the way up. The floodlight ahead of me, one of the big towers, slowly swung its glare across the road. The beam advanced like a searcher's eye. When it finally reached my position, the world went from yellowish headlamp color to harsh white. Every rock and post lit up like midday. For a brief second, the area on the other side of the fence lit up with it. That was when I saw that the ground where the shadow was supposed to be running didn't look flat at all. It dropped off, angle steep, rocks jutting out like broken teeth. Nothing, no truck, no person, no animal the size that shape suggested should have been able to run there without tumbling straight down. And yet, in the halo of that floodlight, that patch of darkness on the far side stayed right where it had been, as if the slope and rocks weren't there. The beam kept rotating, sliding on, leaving my truck and that stretch of fence behind in the weaker glow of my own headlights. The after-image of that steep drop and that impossible flat path lingering over it burned in my mind. I could have kept driving and told myself stories in the morning about how tired eyes and bad angles mess with a person. Instead, I did the one thing that would truly answer whether this was just my head or something else. I braked. The truck rolled down through the gears, then came to a firm stop, idling. Gravel crackled as we settled. Dust hung, then drifted. Beside me, on the far side of the fence, the dark smear stopped too, exactly in line with the cab. Not a foot ahead or behind. Perfectly parallel. My mouth had gone dry. I swallowed and stared straight ahead for a few seconds, trying to decide how brave or stupid I felt. Curiosity won, the way it always has with me. Moving as if the air had gotten thicker, I leaned toward the passenger window and peered out, squinting between the slats. I saw a fence. I saw the hint of the rocky slope beyond. I saw brush, darker patches in the deeper shadow. I didn't see a clear, crisp outline of anything that should not have been there. But the air on that side of the glass felt wrong. You can't see air, obviously, but sometimes you can sense it, how it presses on you, how it carries sound. Over there, it felt denser, like whatever space the fence was protecting was packed thicker than the space on my side. Goosebumps rose on my arms under my jacket. Without really thinking it through, I did something I'd later replay in my head 100 times, alternately calling myself bold and an idiot. I reached down and turned my headlights off. The darkness that dropped into the cab was nearly absolute. For a moment, I could only see the faint gray of the sky and the tiny glows of my dash instruments. The rotating tower behind me was between passes, its beam somewhere out in the distance. Then, on the other side of the fence, the points of light appeared. They didn't flare into existence all at once. They came in clusters, like embers catching, until there were dozens, no, 100 or more, tiny soft glows scattered along the length and height of that invisible mass I'd only sensed before. My first thought was eyes. That primal, something's looking at you from the dark reaction lit up. But these weren't like normal eyes catching a flash. They were too steady, too numerous, and oddly subdued, like screen light rather than reflection. Some of them drifted a little, like they were being held by small moving hands. Others stayed fixed. For a heartbeat, the image made a horrible kind of sense. A crowd of people standing in a cluster on the wrong side of the fence, every one of them holding up a dim phone, watching me. But there was still that impossible geometry problem. There was supposed to be a sheer drop over there. No flat platform for anyone to stand on. No shoulder, no road, no berm. Those lights were hanging in mid-air above an incline. The tower's floodlights swung back into range, its hard white circle crawling along the fence and the ground. It hit my truck, washed my hood, then spilled over to the other side. The stray desert brush lit up. The rocks on the slope gleamed. The pins of light on that shape didn't change. They didn't brighten or fade. They belonged to something that wasn't obeying the same rules. Time stretched and compressed at the same time. I don't know how long I sat there, staring through the fence at that constellation of watching points, my hands locked on the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I remember my heart punching against my ribs, my ears full of the dull, rushing roar of my own blood. If those lights had started to move toward me in any coordinated way, I think I would have thrown the truck into reverse without regard for anything in my path. They didn't. They seemed content to hold their distance, drifting slightly inside the border of that long, wrong-shaped presence. I realized my jaw was clenched so tight it ached. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think instead of just react. "Okay," I whispered, surprising myself. "You stay there. I'll stay here." My hand found the headlight switch and snapped it back on. In an instant, my side of the world reasserted itself. The dirt in front of the truck glowed yellow-white. The fence bars cast sharp shadows. My own reflection faintly ghosted back from the inside of the glass. On the far side, nothing. No little lights, no visible shape, just whatever the desert would look like on any hard, cold night. The sensation of pressure in that direction eased but didn't vanish. It felt like whatever was over there had just stepped back into a slightly deeper dark, giving me the courtesy of not showing itself in my light, but still very much present. I didn't test it any further. Keeping my eyes straight ahead, I eased my foot onto the accelerator. The truck rolled forward, smooth and controlled. The tires found their crunching rhythm again. As the speed picked up back to where it had been, that thick feeling alongside the fence fell into place at my flank once more. I knew it was there. I refused to look. The rest of the maintenance road stretched ahead interminably. Every floodlight tower I passed felt like a checkpoint in some invisible test. Each time their beams swept us, I braced for those personal little glows to show again, defying illumination. They didn't. Whatever that thing was seemed content to exist mostly in the gaps. Finally, though it felt like hours, it ended. The maintenance track merged back into a more common gravel route, farther from the fence, used by ranchers and hunters and whoever else had cause to be out here. The fence itself veered away, taking its groan and its watch with it. With every yard I put between my truck and that line, the sensation of something pacing me faded. When I reached the point where I could no longer even see the gleam of metal slats in the mirror, it was gone entirely, like a hand being removed from the back of my neck. I got home, parked crooked in the dirt, didn't care. Inside the house, all the little normal noises, the fridge motor, the tick of the kitchen clock, the faint rattle of the swamp cooler, felt like a blessing. I locked the door, out of character, then went straight to the old laptop on the table. It took a minute to coax our slow connection into letting me load satellite imagery, but eventually I had that stretch of border up on the screen. The line of the fence was unmistakable, a hard edge between colors. On my side, the maintenance road I'd been on was clear, a pale strip parallel to the barrier, occasionally expanded where equipment had been parked. On the other side, nothing that even pretended to be a road. The terrain dropped away in a series of steep cuts and gullies, darker areas that the satellite's resolution wouldn't fully detail. No tire scars, no graded shoulder, not even the faint suggestion of a game trail big enough for anything with weight to use. I zoomed in until the image broke into blocks. I scrolled along the section where I was sure that presence had been. The only consistent feature was the steepness. I sat back in the chair and stared at the screen, then out the window, toward where the fence would be if I could see that far in the dark. I didn't tell many people. The neighbor who'd recommended the road, sure. He listened, his face going more serious with every sentence, then said, "Yeah, there's spots out there I don't like either," and left it at that. An older rancher, who'd been around longer, just shook his head when I mentioned feeling something pacing the truck along that particular strip. "Some parts of this border weren't meant to be straight lines," he muttered. "You pin one down, another wrinkle shows up. Best to give those wrinkles space." Since that night, I haven't taken that maintenance road again. I'll burn the extra fuel on the longer route, deal with more washboard and more time. When someone mentions it as a shortcut, I shrug and say, my shocks are too old for that much corrugated dirt. Sometimes, out fixing fence at dusk, I'll hear an engine far off running that strip, a low murmur carried on the wind. The floodlights will rotate, slow as ever, painting their narrow windows onto the land, the fence throwing long bars of shadow. If I'm alone and the air is too still, I catch myself looking a little too long at the darkness on the Mexican side, not expecting to see details, just watching for a density, a place where the night seems to bend around, some shape that shouldn't be standing on that slope. In those moments, the memory of those tiny moving lights comes back strongest. Dozens of faint glows like screens or eyes, turning toward me through metal and air. Maps say there's nothing over there that could have paced my truck that night. Satellite images agree. The land is wrong for anything to run so smooth, but I know what it felt like to have something keep perfect time with me for miles along a border that's supposed to separate worlds. And I know, now, that if something out there really wants to follow you, it doesn't care which side of the fence it's technically on. Have your mirrors ever shown you more than the road, like a passenger who disappears the second you turn your head? That question didn't mean anything to me until Vaca Road at 2 a.m. turned my rear view into the only part of the car I was afraid to look at. My name is Winona. I work nights at a gas station off the interstate, the kind of place that always smells like burned coffee and spilled diesel, where the lights hum louder than some of the customers. By the time I lock the doors and kill the pumps, my brain is buzzing, and my body feels like it's made of sand. Vaca Road is my way home, 30-odd miles of two-lane blacktop that winds west into the dark, past saguaros and mesquite and the occasional lonely porch light. The night this started, my shift had gone long. A late delivery, a register issue. One guy who wouldn't stop talking even after I'd flipped the closed sign. Small delays that added up. By the time I finally pulled out of the lot, the clock on my dash was flirting with 2:00 a.m. The first few miles off the interstate, Vaca Road feels almost civilized. There are still a few houses, a stray yard light, the faint orange halo of town at your back. But it doesn't take long for all of that to fall away. The road starts to curve in long, gentle bends, slipping between low hills. Saguaros line the shoulders like silent metronomes, each one sliding past my passenger window in a slow, even rhythm. Inside the car, the dashboard glow was soft and green. Something in the back rattled every time I hit a rough patch. A half-empty toolbox, maybe, or an old bottle rolling around. The air out there at that hour was cold enough that my breath fogged a little when I exhaled too hard, even with the heater on low. I was tired in that dangerous way you get after too many night shifts in a row. Not falling asleep at the wheel tired, not yet. But the kind where your eyes start trying to relax on their own and your thoughts wander too far from the asphalt in front of you. That's probably why I checked the side mirror when I did. I wasn't expecting to see anything. There hadn't been a car behind me since I'd turned off the main highway. The mirror showed the curve of the road retreating into the dark, the white of the shoulder lines fading, the faint silhouette of Chola and Saguaro under a thin strip of stars, and a girl walking along the right shoulder. She was maybe 15 or 16 if I had to guess. Hard to tell in the mirror with my taillights coloring everything red. She wore a white hoodie with the hood up, strings hanging, the fabric glowing faintly in the dimness. Her head was bent over a phone in her hands, thumbs moving like she was texting as she walked. I blinked once, twice, letting my eyes refocus. She stayed there, framed perfectly in the side mirror. Steady pace, same distance behind my car, like I'd just passed her, and she was continuing on. "What are you doing out here?" I murmured, more to myself than to her. Instinct told me to check the actual road, not just the reflection. I looked back through the windshield, to the shoulder on my right, where she should have been. Nothing. Just the asphalt edge, then gravel, then a shallow ditch and a row of saguaros. No white hoodie, no girl, no glow of a phone screen in the dark. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I looked at the mirror again. She was still there, same position, same slightly hunched posture over the phone. If anything, she seemed a little closer now, as if I'd slowed and she'd caught up a bit. The red wash from my taillights haloed her shoes, picking out the scuff of pale soles. I glanced forward, then back again, convinced I was missing her somehow. Maybe there was a lag in my eyes. Maybe the glass was playing tricks. Windshield. Empty shoulder. Mirror. Girl in the hoodie. The sensible part of my brain started throwing out possibilities. Maybe it was some kind of double reflection, something inside the car bouncing around in the glass. Maybe a long smear on the mirror was catching my own jacket in a weird way. I did a small test, shifted slightly in my seat, tipped my head. My reflection moved. The girl's didn't, not in the way it should have. She kept walking, perfectly aligned with the white line of the road behind me, head down, thumbs moving. A prickle crept up the back of my neck. I told myself to stop staring at the mirror and pay attention to the curve I was in. Aravaca's not a straight shot. You can get yourself in real trouble if you forget that. I watched the center line glide under my headlights, the slow sway of saguaros on either side, the occasional flash of a reflector post. Curiosity, or something worse, drew my eyes back to the mirror. She was closer. Before, she'd been a small figure in the distance, her whole body visible. Now the frame cut her off around mid-thigh. I could see more detail, the way the hood bunched up around her neck, the shadow where her hair must have been spilling out from under it. The phone in her hands glowed a cold bluish white, but the light didn't seem to land on anything. Not her face, not the road, just a little self-contained rectangle. I realized I'd unconsciously eased off the gas, my speedometer creeping down. The long two-lane was empty ahead of me. The only motion in the world seemed to be my car and that small, steady figure in the mirror. There's a point where not doing something feels more dangerous than doing it. I told myself I was overreacting, that there was probably a perfectly normal explanation, that if it really was a girl out here alone at this hour, I couldn't just drive on. I flipped my blinker on out of habit, even though there was nobody around to care, and slowed to a careful stop on the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires as I eased as far right as I dared. In the mirror, the girl kept walking. The car rolled to a halt. The engine dropped to a low idle. I shifted into park and watched the glass. She took 3 more steps, then stopped too, exactly at the point where my rear bumper would line up if she was actually on the shoulder. Her head tilted, like she was looking up for the first time. In the mirror, I saw her turn, not toward the road, not toward the desert, but straight toward my car. The hood hid most of her face. All I got was the hint of a chin, the suggestion of a nose, and the glossy blank of the phone screen still in her hands. I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry. "Okay," I said under my breath. "Okay." I twisted in my seat to look out the back window. Empty road. No girl. No figure in white. Just the faint glow of my taillights catching the curve of the asphalt and the gray of the shoulder. I looked right, through the passenger window. The shoulder stretched away, gravel and scrub. No one walking. No one standing. Slowly, like I was afraid of snapping something in myself, I turned back to the mirror. She was no longer on the road. She was inside the car. In the reflection, she sat in the middle of my back seat, right where it would be hardest to catch someone in your peripheral vision. Her hoodie was still up, but I could see more of her face now. A suggestion of eyes in shadow, a pale shape where a mouth would be. She held her phone loosely in her lap, dark screen turned upward. Her head was angled toward the mirror, toward me. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to whip my head around and check the real seat, to prove to myself that there was nothing there. But another older part of my brain, the part that has decided somewhere along the way that there are some things it's safer not to confirm, kept me staring straight forward, eyes locked on the glass. "Hey," I managed, my voice sounding thin in the closed space. The girl in the mirror didn't answer. She just watched, or seemed to. It was hard to tell. The shadows under the hood were stubborn, refusing to give up details. The car felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I realized I wasn't breathing and forced myself to inhale. The faint rattle in the back of the car sounded suddenly too loud. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, immediately feeling stupid. Her hands moved a fraction. For a second, I thought she was going to pick the phone up again. Instead, her fingers tightened slightly around it in her lap, like she was gripping it harder. The idea that I was talking to a reflection of nothing in an empty car on an empty road at 2-something in the morning hit me all at once. I laughed, a short, tense bark I didn't recognize as mine. "Win," I told myself, using my own nickname like a scolding, "you need sleep." The girl in the mirror tilted her head a tiny bit to the other side, like she was listening harder. That snapped something in me. I reached back with one hand, keeping my eyes on the mirror, and patted the actual back seat. My fingers met worn fabric, the familiar give of the cushion, the cold little buckle of the middle seat belt. No body, no extra weight, no warmth. In the mirror, she stayed put, watching. I pulled my hand back into my lap, fingers trembling. "Okay," I said, louder this time. "Okay, we're done." I put the car back in drive, signaled out of habit, and pulled away from the shoulder. The engine sounded higher than it should have, too eager. The road started to unspool ahead of me again. The same gentle curves, the same marching saguaros. The faint yip of a coyote carried across somewhere in the distance. In the mirror, the girl stayed in the same spot on the seat, as if the movement of the car didn't affect her at all. For the rest of that drive, I refused to look back more than quick flicks to check traffic. Each time, her shape was there, quiet, mostly still, hoodie up, phone in her lap. Never in the direct view through the windshield, never in the solid world if I reached back, only ever in that rectangle of glass. When I finally pulled into the little lot beside my rental, single wide, porch light that flickered when the wind hit it wrong, my nerves were stretched thin. I parked under the one decent bulb and killed the engine. The sudden lack of vibration made the silence ring in my ears. I made myself look one last time before I opened the door. The back seat in the mirror was empty. The faint imprint of the upholstery, the shadow where the headrests cut the view, nothing else. A laugh bubbled up, half relief, half shakiness. "Sleep," I muttered to myself. "You need actual sleep." I went inside, locked the door, turned on every light I had, and made bad instant noodles at the counter until the edges of what I'd seen felt less sharp. By the time I went to bed, I'd convinced myself I'd just had one of those liminal hour experiences, when your brain is too fried to tell reality from the ideas it's throwing at the wall. That explanation lasted 3 nights. On the fourth, a coworker hitched a ride home with me. He was between cars, and I was going his way. It was early, just after midnight. And Arivaca Road looked almost kind compared to that first night. Clearer stars, less weight in the air. We talked about work for the first 10 minutes, dumb small stuff about customers, and the way the soda fountain was always breaking. Then the road started its long, gentle S-curves, and the conversation thinned out. I found my eyes bouncing between the windshield and the mirror again out of habit. The back seat in the glass was empty, the dim reflection of my coworker's head visible where he sat on the passenger side. My shoulders began to unclench. "Do you ever feel like this road's too quiet?" he asked suddenly. I huffed a little laugh. Isn't that the point? No traffic, no sirens, no drunk guys screaming at you from pump 3. No, I mean... He trailed off, checked his side mirror, then the one on my side. I keep thinking I see someone in the glass. My grip on the wheel tightened. Yeah? He shifted, adjusting his shoulder against the seat. Like, out of the corner of my eye. Every time I look straight, it's just me and you. But when I'm watching the reflection, it's like there's I don't know, like someone walks by behind my head. A jolt of cold went through my middle. "Where?" I asked, keeping my tone as casual as I could manage. He stopped himself. "Forget it, I'm just tired." He turned his gaze firmly to the front, staring out at the saguaros slipping by in the headlights. I risked a quick glance at the rear view. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss. Then, as we went around a shallow bend, the angle caught just right, and I saw her. Seated again in the center of the back seat in the mirror, hoodie up, phone in her hands. My coworker shifted again, bringing his shoulder away from the door. "It's freezing in here suddenly," he muttered, rubbing at his arm. The heater had been on the same low setting. I didn't feel any change in temperature at the front. But something in the back of the car felt heavier. The faint rattle I always heard from back there had gone still, like whatever normally slid around had found a new equilibrium. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah." He forced a laugh. "Just got this weird feeling like someone brushed past my shoulder. You ever get that? Like somebody walked behind you and you know nobody could have?" I swallowed. "Sometimes," I said. We didn't talk much the rest of the drive. When I dropped him off at his place, small house with a chain-link fence and a porch light that made everything look yellow, he hesitated with the door half open. "You're sure nobody else was in the car?" he asked, almost joking. I gave him a look. "Where would I have put them? In the trunk?" He shook his head quickly. "Never mind. Long week." After he was gone, the car felt emptier, but not less occupied. Over the next couple of weeks, it became a pattern. If I drove Arivaca Road right after my shift, alone, the girl would appear in the mirror somewhere along the route, sometimes walking behind the car, sometimes sitting in the back. If I picked up someone, a coworker, a neighbor, catching a ride, once my cousin visiting from Tucson, they'd mention feeling something. A brush by their arm, a cold patch of air near their ear, the sense of someone standing just behind them when they glanced at their reflection. No one saw her directly. No one turned and pointed and said, "There, right there, someone's in your car." It was always phrased as a feeling, a quick shiver, a comment about the mirror acting funny. I stopped checking the rear view unless I absolutely had to for safety. When I did, she was always there, quiet, a white shape in the middle seat, head bowed or tilted, phone never quite lighting her face. You get to a point where you either break or adapt. I adapted. "Hey," I'd sometimes say out loud when the road was too silent and the sky felt too big. "You can ride. Just don't mess with the steering, okay?" I never expected an answer. I never got one. The story of who she was came from a place as ordinary as the horror felt extraordinary. The gas station. One slow night, a regular came in, a guy from Arivaca who always paid cash, always bought the same brand of cigarettes, and always had an opinion about the weather. We got to talking about the road. I don't even remember how it came up, only that I mentioned not liking the mirrors out there anymore. He gave me a long look, the kind older locals reserve for people who've stumbled into something without knowing its weight. "You ever drive past mile 9? He asked. "All the time," I said. "That's my whole commute." He tapped the counter with 2 fingers, thinking. "There was a girl killed out there," he said eventually. "Few years back. Walking home from a party, drunk driver clipped her and kept going. They found her in the ditch in the morning. White hoodie, they said. Phone smashed up next to her." The little hairs on my arm stood up. "Hit and run?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer from the way he said it. "Yeah," he said. "Driver never came forward. Folks talked for a few weeks, then moved on. Road doesn't move on, though." He said it like it was just one more fact, like telling me saguaros live 100 years or that the coyotes sound closer after rain. That night, driving home, I checked the mile markers along the way, the small battered green signs people usually ignore. When I passed the one marked 9, I felt a tiny pull in my chest, like stepping over a place where the ground remembers something different than you do. In the rear view, she sat in the middle seat, hoodie up, phone cradled in her hands. I tried something I hadn't dared before. "I'm sorry," I said. It felt weird, apologizing into a mirror, but it was all I had. "For what happened to you," I added. "For whoever didn't stop." The car's noises hummed around me. The engine, the faint rattle in the back, the whir of the heater. Outside, a coyote called once, answered by another farther off, their voices threading through the mesquite and cactus. In the glass, she lifted her head a fraction. For the first time, I caught the suggestion of her eyes under the hood. They weren't glowing, not dramatic horror movie eyes, just dark shapes where they should be. But there was something like focus in them, like the difference between looking past someone and looking at them. My throat tightened. "You can ride with me," I said, hand steady on the wheel, "but I can't fix what happened. I'm just trying to get home." She didn't nod. She didn't vanish in some puff of cinematic closure. She just kept looking, then slowly lowered her head again, attention drifting back to the dark rectangle of the phone in her lap. After that, things shifted a little. Passengers still occasionally mentioned weird feelings, like a breath by their ear when they checked their makeup in the visor mirror, or the sense of someone sliding past their shoulder in the glass when nobody was behind them. But the edge of panic in those comments dulled. It became something they shrugged off with a laugh, the way you do when a chill crawls up your spine for no good reason. For me, she became, if not welcome, then familiar. I started to think of the rear view as a separate space, like a thin vertical room that only existed when I looked at it. A room where a girl in a white hoodie walked endless miles along a 2-lane road or sat quietly in the back seat of my car, never quite touching the world I could reach with my hands. I still don't look too long. There's a line between acknowledging something and inviting it closer, and out here, you learn not to cross those lines lightly. But sometimes, when Aravaca Road is at its emptiest, when the saguaros are just dark shapes sliding by and the only sounds are tires on asphalt and distant animal calls, I'll catch the mirror at just the right moment and see her there. And every time, without really meaning to, I hear that hook question in my head. Have your mirrors ever shown you more than the road, like a passenger who disappears the second you turn your head? I know my answer now. So if you ever find yourself alone on Aravaca Road at 2 a.m, with the dashboard glow soft on your hands and the saguaros ticking by like a slow metronome, pay attention to what your mirrors show you. And if you see a girl in a white hoodie who isn't there when you look straight ahead, maybe don't slam on the brakes or pretend she isn't real. Just keep your hand steady, your eyes mostly on the road, and give her a ride the only place she seems able to exist, on that thin strip of glass between you and the dark. If a late-night radio voice started telling your story out loud, detail by detail, how far would you drive before switching it off? Driving the empty highway between Nogales and Tucson that night, I found out my limit. And it turns out I kept listening long after I should have killed the engine and walked away from the car. My name is McKinley, And back then, I was one of those college commuters who spend more time on the road than on campus. I lived with relatives closer to the border to save on rent and drove up to Tucson for classes 3 or 4 nights a week. That stretch of highway between Nogales and Tucson became my second home. Dim dash lights, deep black desert pressed against the windows, the low hum of my tires laying down a kind of hypnotic soundtrack. On a good night, traffic is light. You get the occasional semi-thundering past, its wake rocking your little car, but mostly it's just you and whatever station you can catch. On a bad night, your mind starts filling all that emptiness with things you don't want to think about. This was a bad night. I'd stayed late on campus, study group that ran over, then killing time in the library because the idea of doing the drive half asleep felt worse than doing it wired. By the time I pulled out onto the highway southbound, it was after midnight. The sky was cloudless, stars sharp and cold. The desert beyond the headlights looked like an ocean of ink. The first half hour or so, everything was normal. I tuned through the usual FM suspects. Static, Spanish pop, a country station that lost its grip every few miles. Some talk show where 2 guys argued about sports like it mattered more than oxygen. I settled on a station just because it was the least fuzzy, turned the volume down low, and let the sound blend into the hum of the car. About 20 minutes north of Nogales, the signal started to fall apart. It does that out there. Hills, distance, the fact that you're driving through the middle of not much. Voices stretched into mush. Drums became a soft, thudding mess. I hit the seek button, more out of boredom than anything, letting the radio hop from one half station to another. That's when it landed on 107.3. The numbers blinked on the display with that tiny, satisfied click the tuner makes when it finally finds something strong enough to hold. For a second, all I heard was white noise, the soft shh of empty air. Then a voice came through, calm, measured, half of it in Spanish, half in a kind of broken English that sounded like someone who understood every word but hadn't practiced saying them out loud in a while. Car, pequeña, gris, 2 doors, it said. Alone, student, coming from Tucson, going to casa, más cerca de la línea. My hand froze an inch from the volume knob. Lots of people drive small gray cars. Lots of people are alone, late at night, heading somewhere vaguely described as near the line. But something about the way the voice said it, like it wasn't guessing, like it already knew the answers to the questions it didn't bother to ask, made my skin tighten. Highway is empty, the voice went on. No one behind you. You're checking espejos, mirrors. Too much. I glanced in the rear view, a purely reflexive move. Suddenly 100% aware that there really was no one behind me. Just 2 lanes of dark and the faint glow of my taillights stretching back into nothing. Almost accident ahead, the voice said. Not for you. For the truck that will not see the animal. A soft chuckle, not unkind. You will see its lights. You will slow down. You won't know why. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and forced a laugh. Okay, I said, half out loud, half to myself. That's creepy. Good job, prank station. This is the point where a sensible person switches to another channel. I told myself I would. In another second. After I heard what it said next. The voice continued, sliding more firmly into Spanish now, like it was warming up, describing the road, the curve I was in, the faint glow of a rest area miles ahead. I understood enough to follow along. Then, without any transition, it flipped into English so smooth and perfect, it made me think I'd misjudged it before. It started talking about my car, not just small and gray, but the dent in the back bumper from a parking lot hit and run, the crack in the dashboard from when I'd dropped a heavy textbook, the sticker half peeled off the rear window because my roommate had slapped it on as a joke, and I'd never fully scraped it away. My hands went slick on the wheel. I reached for the radio again, intending to turn it off this time, but my fingers hesitated on the volume knob. The hum of the tires on asphalt sounded suddenly thin, without something to fill the space above it. "Your hands are sweating," the voice said, perfectly flat. "You're still listening." The way it said listening made something twist in my stomach. There was no question in it, no judgment either, just a fact, dropped between us like a stone. I swallowed and flexed my fingers against the wheel. "Fine," I said. "You got my attention. Congratulations." "Congratulations," the voice echoed lightly, then laughed once, soft and short, like it appreciated the joke. "You think this is a game. You are telling yourself it's just some late-night show. Somebody hacked the app. My phone is picking up something." It was, in fact, exactly what I was telling myself. The voice dropped my city, my major, the number of times I'd changed it. It mentioned the brand of instant coffee I lived on, and the way my mother still texted me every Friday to ask if I was coming home for the weekend, even though home, in that sense, was 3 hours away, and I almost never could. No one knew all of that. Not as a full list, not in that order. My throat went dry. I glanced at the radio display. 107.3 glowed back at me, steady. The signal strength icon pulsed like it was barely straining at all. "You're wondering how much of your life you've put online without thinking," the voice said, "and how much of it your car has heard." I licked my lips. "Who are you?" For a moment there was only the soft hiss of the background, like the sound between stations was just resting. Then, "I am a frequency," the voice said. "Tonight you are tuned to it. That is enough." A pair of headlights appeared ahead, low and far off. A semi, judging by the height. The road dipped slightly before rising again. The beams disappeared for a second, then reappeared as the truck climbed. I felt the brief urge to speed up, to prove something. What, I couldn't say. Instead, my foot eased a little off the gas, like my body had been waiting for an excuse to match what the radio had already told me. "There," the voice said. "The almost accident." I watched as a dark shape shot out from the right shoulder ahead. A deer, or a dog, or something else low and fast. The semi's headlights swung wildly as the driver yanked the wheel. For a heartbeat, I saw the side of the trailer, bright white, knife-edged against the night. The truck stayed upright by what felt like sheer stubbornness, then roared on, its taillights shrinking. If I hadn't slowed when I did, I realized I might have been much closer when that happened. Maybe close enough to get caught in whatever chain reaction followed. "Not yours," the voice said. "Not tonight." The hum of the tires suddenly seemed very loud. I could have turned the radio off then. I should have, maybe. Instead, some part of me, the same part that slows down at the scene of an accident even when you know you shouldn't look, leaned in. "Okay, frequency," I said quietly. "What else you got?" There was a pause. I pictured some faceless DJ on the other end, leaning over a console, grinning. Then the voice changed. It didn't sound like a stranger anymore. It sounded like me. Not exactly the way I hear myself in my own head. That's always a little off. But the way I hear myself in recordings. The slight rasp on certain consonants. The way I put a tiny uptick at the end of sentences when I'm not sure I should be talking. It was my cadence, my rhythm, stripped of hesitation. "When you were 7, my own voice said from the speaker, you hid in the back of the coat closet to listen to your parents fight." My chest went tight. "You knew you weren't supposed to," it continued smooth. "You told yourself you were just putting your shoes away, but you stayed after that, pressed between winter coats, counting how many times they said each other's names." My fingers dug into the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles hurt. No one knew that. I barely remembered it myself most days. It wasn't a core trauma I'd cried about to friends or therapists. It was just one of those small, sharp memories you keep stuffed in a box at the back of your mind. "I don't like this," I said. The laugh that came from the speakers was my own, slightly higher. "You are still listening." "Stop," I said. "Stop," it echoed, then went on without missing a beat. "You tell yourself that a lot. Stop thinking about that night by the river. Stop replaying the conversation when you said you'd take the late drive so your roommate wouldn't have to. Stop wondering what would have happened if you'd fallen asleep at the wheel that one time and never made it to class. The highway felt narrower. The desert outside the windows seemed to lean in closer. Enough, I snapped. The voice dropped quiet, but the station didn't cut out. I could still hear the almost inaudible hiss, the tiny artifacts of a live signal. I took a shaky breath, forced my shoulders to unclench, and reached for the dial. "If you turn it off," my own voice said lightly, "you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you missed." My hand hovered over the knob. For a second, I hated how well it understood me. "Fine," I said. "Say whatever, just don't talk in my voice. It's creepy." There was a small, theatrical sigh. Then the tone shifted again, back toward that earlier calm, neither quite mine nor entirely anyone else's. "Better?" it asked. "Marginally," I muttered. "Good," it said. "Now pay attention. This part is more important." The next few minutes were a blur of details, some mundane, some horrifyingly specific. The color of the notebook on the passenger seat, the text message I hadn't answered yet because I didn't know what to say, the song I always skipped on a playlist because it reminded me of someone I wasn't over. Then it moved into things I hadn't told anyone. The time I'd thought about turning the wheel just a little too far into oncoming traffic. Not because I actually wanted to die, but because I wanted everything to stop for a while. The lie I'd told on a scholarship application. The way I sometimes drove the long way home so I wouldn't have to pass the house where something bad had happened years ago. It didn't ask questions. It didn't berate. It just narrated, like a documentary about some stranger's life that happened to be mine, playing over late-night FM. Somewhere ahead, a green sign flashed past, showing the distance to the next exit. I realized, distantly, that I'd crossed some invisible line in the drive. The one where, every time I'd taken this route before, I'd started to feel closer to home. "If you keep going," the voice said, "you will pass exit 281. That was the one the outline in my head marked as the point where things became unambiguously familiar again. After that, it was only a handful of curves and a slow drift toward the city's distant glow. "If you turn off there," it went on, "this will stop. You will get to sleep sooner. You will tell yourself it was stress. Maybe you will never look for 107.3 again." "And if I don't?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Then you will hear what happens next," it said. I could see the sign for 281 up ahead now, its reflective surface catching my headlights. My hands tightened on the wheel, but I didn't move toward the right lane. Part of me screamed to take the exit, to get off this ghost frequency and into the normal world of overpasses and on-ramps and fast food billboards. The rest of me kept the car straight. The exit lane slid by on my right, the arrow overhead pointing toward an off-ramp I'd taken dozens of times before. The white stripes marking the split flashed by. On the radio, there was a tiny pleased pause. "Okay," the voice said. "Then listen." What it told me after that isn't something I want to repeat word for word. It talked about time, about paths not taken and versions of me that never existed, about nights when I'd almost made a choice that would have changed everything. It described, in chilling detail, a crash that nearly happened 3 months prior, when a truck in the opposite lane drifted over the center line and I, on reflex, drifted too, only correcting at the last possible second. It talked about hospital corridors and waiting rooms that might have been. And then it did something worse. It started describing a future route. "Someday soon," it said quietly. "You will not be the only one listening." It painted a picture of another car on this same highway, months from now. A driver older than me, tired in a way that had less to do with school and more to do with life. It described their dashboard, their choice of radio station, the way their hands would tighten when they heard a certain story at 107.3 about a nervous college student driving alone at night, refusing to take exit 281. It gave my name, Hearing it spoken in that context, in that tone, made the back of my eyes burn. When they hear you, it said, they will think it is just a story, but they will also change lanes a little earlier than they meant to. They will tap the brake a second sooner. They will live a little longer. You will have done that for them. Why? I asked, voice shaking. Why me? Why this? Because you were listening, it said simply, and you didn't turn it off. The miles blurred. At some point, the first faint glow of Tucson's outskirts crept up around the edges of the horizon. Street lights in the far distance etched a low orange line. The desert outside the windows went from endless to merely big. Without warning, the signal fractured. The calm voice splintered into static. A pop song burst through, mid-chorus, too loud and aggressively cheerful. I flinched and grabbed for the knob, thumb twisting it down. The display still read 107.3. I hit scan. The radio jumped to another station, then another. An ad. A DJ laughing. Static. Nowhere, in that little digital cycle, did I find that voice again. When I parked outside the place I was staying, the dash clock said I'd made good time. Better than I should have. Honestly, given how much my mind had been elsewhere. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. Inside, the apartment was dark and quiet. I lay awake much too long, replaying every word I'd heard, trying to convince myself it was some elaborate late-night prank show with access to way too much of my data. The next day, between classes, I tried to look up FM 107.3 in the area. I found plenty of stations, sure, some oldies, some talk, one that seemed to be nothing but static and test tones. None of them had the right call letters. None of them mentioned a weird bilingual late show that told you your own life. Weeks passed. The drive became routine again. I stopped scrolling so far, on the dial. I told myself that night had been a one-off, something my brain had done to itself out of exhaustion and fear. Then, months later, a friend of a friend mentioned something at a party, just a throwaway line, the kind of thing you say when you're trying to sound spooky and failing. You ever had your radio talk about you? They asked the circle of us around a cheap folding table. Like, really about you. My heart gave a weird little skip. They described driving that same highway late at night, scanning for something to keep them awake. Landing on 107.3. Hearing a story in English, clear as day, about a college kid driving alone between Nogales and Tucson, being told their own secrets over the air. They even used her name, the friend of a friend said. McKinley or McKenna or something like that. It was freaky. Someone else laughed it off, made a joke about creepypasta and ARGs. The conversation moved on. I sat there, my red plastic cup suddenly flimsy in my hand, and realized the station had been telling the truth about at least one thing. Someday, someone else would hear me. I don't scan that far on the dial anymore. I keep the radio set to stations I know, even if it means dealing with static and bad songs. When the highway is empty and the night feels too big, I sometimes drive in silence, letting the hum of the tires be the only soundtrack. But there are nights when curiosity itches at me, when my fingers hover over the seek button and that first hook question echoes in my head. If a late-night radio voice started telling your story out loud, detail by detail, how far would you drive before switching it off? Now I know, far enough that, for better or worse, I became part of someone else's broadcast. How many quiet shortcuts would you take before realizing the price was people slowly forgetting you ever existed? That question haunted me long after I started using the nameless dirt cutoff near the Arizona border, a rough back road that shaved an hour off my nightly courier runs, but at a cost I never saw coming until it was too late. My name is Caden, and for the past 2 years, I've been running packages across the border. Nothing glamorous, just legal docks, small shipments for businesses that don't want the hassle of official ports. The main route through the port of entry near Nogales is a nightmare after dark. Lines of semis idling like sleeping beasts, Floodlights sweeping the asphalt. Agents with dogs and questions that drag everything out. I'd clock out exhausted, the weight of the day pressing on my shoulders, and face another hour of crawl before hitting the highway north. That's how I found the cutoff. It was a fluke, really. One night, after a brutal delay at the port, some paperwork glitch that had me circling the lot like a vulture, I spotted a faded sign half buried in mesquite. Service Road, authorized vehicles only. No name, no map reference, just a rutted dirt track veering east off the access road, parallel to the border fence but far enough to dodge the patrols. I was desperate, the clock ticking past midnight, so I took it. The first drive was tense. Hard-packed dirt ruts bucked the undercarriage of my old sedan, scattered trash, crumpled water bottles, old tires half sunk in dust, flashed in the headlights like relics from forgotten migrations. The sky overhead was packed with sharp stars, no moon to soften the edges. And beyond the windows, the desert stretched black and indifferent. In the distance, the unchanging glow from the border station hung like a perpetual dawn, too far to reach, but close enough to remind you of the line you weren't supposed to cross. Fine dust coated the windshield in a hazy film, turning the world into a smudged photograph. No other headlights pierced the night. It was just me, the low growl of the engine, and the occasional skitter of pebbles under the tires. It took 20 minutes to merge back onto the highway, but I'd saved nearly an hour. The relief hit like cool air after a hot shift. This is it, I thought, pulling into my apartment lot with time to spare for a beer and bed. No one to tell yet, my routine was solitary enough, but I filed it away as my secret edge. The second night, I took it again. Easier this time. I knew the dips, the way the ruts funneled you around a dry wash without warning. The dust devils spun up small in the beams, ghosts of wind playing tag with the fence shadows. By the third night, it felt like home. The loneliness of the route wrapped around me like a familiar coat, peaceful, almost meditative. No radios blaring, no horns, just the stars wheeling overhead and that distant border glow, steady as a heartbeat. A week in, the first odd thing happened. At the courier office the next morning, Maria, the dispatcher, who'd worked with me since day one, handed me my route sheet with a blank look. "You want the usual?" she asked, tapping the coffee machine. "Black, 2 sugars," I said, same as always. She paused, frowning. "Wait, do you take cream? I swear I had it right before." I laughed it off. "Nah, black's fine." "You're good." But it nagged at me. Maria knew my order. We'd joked about it 100 times, how I was the only guy who pretended to like it bitter. Still, one slip. People get tired. I shrugged and headed out. The cutoff called me back that night. The dirt felt smoother under the tires, like it was settling into my rhythm. Trash along the edges caught the light. A shredded backpack, faded sneakers half buried. The stars seemed brighter, the border glow a comforting constant. I started looking forward to it. The isolation, the way the world narrowed to just the road and me. 2 weeks passed. The shortcuts added up. More sleep, fewer arguments with port delays, a little extra cash from faster runs. But the slips grew. My neighbor, the guy who'd nod at me in the hall and borrow tools now and then, knocked one evening. "Hey, you got a screwdriver? The super's not around." "Sure," I said, grabbing it from my kitchen drawer. "How's the sink holding up?" He blinked. "Sink? Oh, yeah. It was the door hinge last time. Thanks, man." He took the tool without the usual fist bump, walking off like we'd just met. Inside jokes faded next. At a team lunch, rare for us border runners, Carlos, my usual riding buddy on double shifts, stared at my plate. "You always get the chili fries, right? Or was that someone else?" I forced a grin. "Yeah, man, same old. What's with you?" He shrugged. "Dunno. Feels like I'm mixing you up with that other guy. The one with the nickname..." "What was it?" "Spike," I said. It was my road name, from a dumb story about a flat tire years back. Everyone used it. Carlos laughed uneasily. "Right. Spike. Weird. That night on the cutoff, the attachment deepened. The ruts hugged the wheels like old friends. The dust on the windshield patterned into familiar swirls from my wipers. No semis thundering past, no border chatter on the scanner. Just the sky's sharp stars and that eternal glow pulling me along. I rolled the window down, letting the cool desert air whip in, carrying the scent of creosote and dry earth. For the first time in months, the job felt mine, personal. The road didn't judge, it just was. By the end of the month, the forgetting accelerated. My sister called, our weekly check-in, the one where she'd tease me about never visiting. Caden, wait, is that your name? God, I always call you something else. It's Caden, I said, heart sinking. You okay? Yeah, just brain fog. Anyway, how's the border gig? Still driving that beater? We talked. But her questions skimmed the surface. No probing about my roots. No remembering the time I'd bailed her out of a bad date story. When we hung up, I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over her contact. It still said, sis, but felt distant, like a label on an empty box. The courier office was worse. Maria handed me a new badge one morning. Yours got damaged, get this scanned. I looked at it. KD, courier ID 478. No photo yet, but when I swiped it at the gate, the system beeped red. Reissue, the screen flashed. Glitch, the guard muttered. Happens. But it wasn't. By afternoon, Carlos cornered me in the lot. Hey, new guy, Caden, right? You covering Nogales tonight? I've been here 2 years, I snapped. He backed off, eyes confused. Sorry, man, you just look familiar. That night, I hit the cutoff harder than usual, tires kicking up dust clouds that glowed ethereal in the taillights. The scattered trash, old tires like black moons, plastic bags snagged on barbed wire, felt like markers of my territory. The border glow pulsed faintly, stars sharp as accusations overhead. No other cars. The road was mine, erasing the day's noise with every rut. I whispered to it sometimes, half joking. You get me, right? You remember. A month and a half in, the erasure hit home. My apartment key stuck in the lock that evening. I jiggled it, cursed, then heard footsteps inside. The door opened to a woman I didn't know, mid-30s, towel over her shoulder. Can I help you? She asked, wary. This is my place, I said, holding up the key. She frowned. We've been here 3 months. Rent's paid through December. You with management? I pushed past, heart pounding, into a space that wasn't mine. Furniture rearranged, photos on the walls of strangers. A family vacation, kids grinning. My couch gone, my boxes vanished. In the bedroom, the closet held women's clothes. No trace of my uniforms or the old guitar I'd kept since high school. Wait, I said, backing out. This can't. Downstairs, the super's office was dark. I banged until a light flicked on. He peered out, bleary-eyed. Yeah? My apartment. 2B. Stuff's gone. He checked a ledger under a desk lamp. 2B. That's the Ramirez family. You selling something? I've lived here 2 years, I insisted. He shook his head. Look, kid, I know everyone. No Caden here. Try the motel on 5th. I stumbled out, the night air thick. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Late pickup at port. You're covering. From dispatch. But when I called Maria, her voice was flat. Who is this? We don't have a Caden on roster. The records were gone. DMV had no license under my name. Bank app, locked, invalid user. Even my sister's contact vanished from recent calls like I'd never dialed. Panic clawed up. I drove, not to the office, but to the cutoff. It was the only thing left, the one constant. The dirt ruts welcomed me, dust coating the dash like a second skin. Stars wheeled above, border glow steady. Trash littered the edges. A child's shoe, rusted cans, symbols of lives that had passed through and been forgotten. The road hummed under me, attached now, possessive. "You're mine," it seemed to say in the silence. No headlights, no witnesses, just us. Then the engine sputtered. A cough, a whine, and the beater died, stranding me midway. Smoke curled from the hood. I popped it. But in the dark, with no tools, it was useless. The cutoff stretched empty ahead and behind, stars indifferent. I walked. Hours, it felt like. Miles of ruts grinding my boots, dust choking my throat. The border glow mocked from afar, unchanging. By dawn, I reached the highway merge, legs burning, and hitched to town. Nothing waited. No job, no home, no face in the mirror that anyone recognized. Strangers eyed me like a ghost. But at the lot where the cutoff began, there she was. My dusty car, abandoned, engine cold but intact. I slid in, key turning smooth. The dash lit up, familiar. The ruts called from the track ahead. I drove it again that night. The price, everything else. But the road remembered. It always would. If this story left you glancing at your own shortcuts a little too long, head over to Haunted Fears on YouTube. Subscribe for more chilling tales from the border's forgotten edges, where the night hides what we all fear to lose. Don't forget to like and comment your own eerie road stories below.